Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where gossip didn't just live in whispers. It echoed off palace walls, danced through market stalls, and sometimes ended up carved in stone. Imagine living in a city so obsessed with storytelling that even the cooks, the guards, and the guy who sweeps the floor all knew more about you than your own mother. In 14th century Mali, gossip wasn't petty. It was an art form, a survival tool, and sometimes an accidental legacy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the hot golden winds of 14th century West Africa, where your sandals stick to the sun-baked earth and the smell of tamarind, sweat, and incense lingers in the thick air. The sun is just dipping behind the towers of Timbuktu, casting long shadows across adobe walls etched with ancient wisdom. You hear drumming in the distance, not a war drum, but the rhythm of someone's business being broadcast to half the capital. Because here in the Empire of Mali, gossip isn't just background noise, it's the sound of power. You'll be walking into the royal court of none other than Mansa Musa, the emperor so wealthy he once destabilized an entire economy by giving away too much gold on a pilgrimage. But don't get distracted by the shimmering piles of treasure, because the real currency here is conversation. Everyone's talking. About everyone. And the king hears all of it. You might think you can keep a secret, but you, a foreigner with dusty sandals and no local network, wouldn't last 5 minutes. Before your second mango, the woman selling woven baskets already knows you cried when you lost your goat in Gao, and the royal cooks are speculating on your love life with an intensity that rivals political debates. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge barefoot through the gates of the imperial compound. Clay walls rise around you, the scent of roasted peanuts and river mud drifting through the air. The court is buzzing, not with politics, not exactly, but with murmurs. Over by the bronze basin, 3 griots are mid-story, their eyes darting to gauge reactions. A woman pauses from dusting the steps to lean just a little closer. This is no accident. These walls are designed to echo. The central courtyard. It might as well be a megaphone. The king's compound doesn't have CCTV, but it has something better, sound traps and human memory. The moment someone mentions a name, especially yours, it reverberates. You glance over your shoulder. Did that boy with the donkey just whisper about you? In the court of Mansa Musa, information flows like the Niger River, twisting, split into channels, feeding every corner of the kingdom. People think of Musa as the Golden King, the patron of Islamic scholarship, the man who built mosques and libraries. True, all of it. But what's often left out is that this king had ears everywhere, and a royal memory like a griot's. In fact, it was said the king never forgot a piece of gossip, especially if it concerned loyalty, grain stores, or romantic alliances. 3 things that, weirdly enough, could all topple a dynasty. If a noble's sister was seen in the wrong doorway after dark, or a merchant whispered one too many compliments about a rival's camel herd, it was logged. Now, you might imagine spies in dark cloaks, but that's not how it worked here. It was more subtle, more social. The gossip system was voluntary. Thriving, even. Everyone wanted to be the first to share something the king hadn't heard. A good tidbit could earn you praise. A great one could earn you gold. A spectacular one? Well, you might be invited to dine at the palace, next to the man you just tattled on. And if you think that's awkward, wait until you realize your informant might be sitting behind you, holding a jug of palm wine and listening to what you're saying. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa actively encouraged this ecosystem or simply let it bloom naturally. But the effect was undeniable. His court functioned as both a center of political decision-making and a never-ending open mic night, one where the stakes were occasionally exile. Even the architecture aided the performance. Walls were smooth enough to carry whispers, but just irregular enough to give eavesdroppers somewhere to lean. High courtyards encouraged breezes that also helped drift conversations further than you'd like. And then there were the griots. Ah yes, the griots, court historians, genealogists, and part-time flamethrowers of personal secrets. If you impressed them, or offended them, they might just immortalize your name in verse. Often sung, often sarcastic. It's not hard to imagine a scene. A visiting noble sits down to breakfast, a few too many fried locusts on his plate, and suddenly the griots start up a cheerful tune about the great lord who talks big but owes 7 goats. Everyone laughs, including the king. The noble smiles, but his left eye twitches. This is the world you're in now. Not a whisper goes unheard. Not a smirk is ignored. And you? You better keep your stories straight, because someone's already rehearsing them for a court performance. You step gingerly into the royal gardens, not because of the cobblestones, but because you know someone is already watching. Not the guards, not the scribes in their long indigo robes, but regular folks, gardeners, couriers, people whose job titles might sound dull until you realize they're also the reason every single person in court knows that Lady Jenny dyed her dog with indigo last week just to match her shoes. Everyone's business is everyone's business. In 14th century Mali, privacy is more of a philosophical suggestion than a real-life practice. If you're breathing, eating, or even just leaning on a wall in a suspiciously thoughtful manner, someone will notice, and someone else will mention it over grilled plantains. Your new tunic? Too bright. That second helping of millet porridge? Greedy. The fact that you sighed and stared at the mosque's roof tiles too long? Clearly troubled. Before long, your moment of deep reflection becomes a 3-act drama by lunchtime. The culture of communal information sharing in Imperial Mali wasn't just social, it was structural. It was how alliances formed, feuds simmered, and reputations either bloomed or combusted. There were rules, of course, unspoken but universally understood. For example, if you leaned in and cupped your hand while speaking, it meant, this information is delicious and must be savored quietly before being loudly retold in 3 different directions. And that's where the real artistry began. Because gossip here wasn't raw, it was marinated, seasoned, served with flair. You didn't just say, someone's goat ran away. You described the goat's facial expression, questioned whether it left willingly, and implied it had a better social life than its owner. Historians still argue whether this was primarily a survival tool or a form of entertainment. But either way, it created a level of social awareness that would terrify any modern introvert. People paid attention. And not because they had to, they wanted to. Sharing stories was how they bonded, how they processed the world. It wasn't malicious, it was collaborative memory. Imagine this. You're sitting under a baobab tree in the mid-morning shade, munching on honeyed yams. A young woman you've never met walks up and says, "Oh, you're the one who got rained on during the harvest festival and slipped in front of the priest, right?" You blink. How did she know? Well, because 6 people told it at 6 different angles, each more entertaining than the last. One version included a chorus of frogs. One blamed the rain gods. Another suggested you were cursed. None of them quite true, but all more interesting than the truth. The impulse to narrativize everything was deeply embedded. It didn't matter if the tale changed slightly or dramatically every time it was passed along. In fact, that was half the point. The story was the thing. The details were just optional accessories. Sometimes these tales traveled faster than messengers. Whole villages would prepare welcome songs for visitors they'd never seen, based entirely on second-hand reports. You'd arrive in a new town, And before you could say hello, someone was asking whether your donkey really danced to the drum beat, or if that was just a metaphor. And you had to play along, because admitting you didn't know what they were talking about made you the least interesting part of the conversation. It was far better to smile, nod, and say something like, "Yes, but only during eclipses." It was also common practice for people to edit and improve each other's gossip. Much like medieval editing circles, only with higher stakes and more mango pulp. If a story came to you unfinished, it was polite to embellish. If it was too dull, you might be asked to never repeat it again. A boring rumor was a social offense, which brings us to court etiquette. Even in official royal gatherings, it wasn't uncommon for nobles to slip bits of personal intel into otherwise dry diplomatic updates. Something like, "Your Majesty, the trade route to Gao is open again. Also, the Songhai envoy's cousin might be pregnant by a griot." A subtle eyebrow raise here, a ripple of polite laughter there. The court loved these moments. It kept things human. Even Mansa Musa, Grand Pilgrim, devout Muslim, the man who flooded Cairo with gold, was known to chuckle at a particularly sharp turn of phrase. After all, a well-placed rumor was sometimes more useful than a well-drawn sword. There was a kind of magic in this verbal culture. A small moment, someone spilling grain, someone glancing too long at the wrong person, could ripple outward, become story, then song, then memory. And eventually, those memories might be recited at formal ceremonies, quoted by griots, or woven into the fabric of Mali's history. You sip some cool hibiscus water. Somewhere nearby, someone says your name, followed by a laugh. You don't know what the joke was, but you do know it was probably about you. And somehow, in this world, that's not a bad thing. You stroll across a polished clay courtyard, and there they are, 3 of them seated cross-legged in the shade of a neem tree, adorned in brilliantly dyed robes, stringed instruments resting nearby. Griots, the original oral search engine. And in 14th century Mali, they are more than just storytellers. They are your search history, your personal archive, your family tree, and your neighborhood rumor mill, wrapped in rhythm and rhyme. These aren't idle musicians strumming background tunes. These are memory specialists, lineage librarians, royal advisors with steel-trap minds and a cheeky streak a mile wide. Their role is critical in Mali society, not only to recount history, but also to keep it lively. And nothing livens up a dusty family lineage like a juicy anecdote wedged right between "his father was a noble warrior" and "his goat once escaped and found better company." They don't just tell stories, they perform them, complete with exaggerated voices, dramatic pauses, and the occasional eyebrow wiggle. If you think you can sneak through court life without being immortalized in verse, you are delightfully mistaken. Because in the empire of Mansa Musa, even your small missteps can become ballads, and griots love a ballad. Imagine being introduced like this. "Behold, son of no one in particular, but famous for tripping on mango skins not once, not twice, but 4 times during a single ceremony." And it rhymes, and it slaps. Historians still argue whether griots had total freedom to say whatever they liked, or whether they subtly filtered things to suit the ears of royalty. Some believe they used humor as a kind of diplomatic shield, saying dangerous things safely by hiding them inside jokes and melodies. Others think they were the unofficial voice of truth, their winks and chuckles signaling deeper meanings beneath the surface. Either way, they wielded serious influence. If a griot decided your scandal wasn't worth singing about, your social life might just wither into silence. But if they took a liking to your tale, if they spun your escapade into a lyrical masterpiece, then congratulations, you'd officially entered the strange and prestigious realm of Malian public legend. And gossip, for a griot, wasn't a casual thing. It was raw material. They shaped it like clay, textured it with musical cadence, and performed it like theater. Their audiences weren't just listening, they were feeling the rhythm of the drama. Suspenseful pauses, laughter eruptions, gasps and groans. In a court where oral performance was king, griots were the crown jewel. There's a famous and possibly apocryphal example. During one particularly awkward dinner at court, a griot stood and began a song about the noble who dined twice but paid once. Nobody named, of course. But everyone turned to look at Lord Timbuktu, who turned a shade that can only be described as boiled yam blush. To be gossiped about by a griot was both a risk and an honor. You had to be interesting to be included, after all. In this society, dullness was the ultimate shame. And the griots had a keen radar for dullness. If your scandal didn't include a talking parrot, an unlikely rainstorm, or a poetic moral twist, they might pass you over entirely. And just in case you're wondering, yes, griots were absolutely used strategically. Sometimes the king would plant a bit of gossip with a griot, knowing it would be sung into the ears of nobles who needed a subtle nudge. A verse about fickle alliances and men who forget favors could spark days of nervous sidelong glances at council meetings. You walk a little slower now, realizing you've passed one griot 3 times already, and he's started to hum a suspiciously familiar melody. Was that your name in the chorus? And something about tripping over a chicken. There's no hiding here. No blend into the crowd. If you breathe, sneeze, or even sigh dramatically in a royal courtyard, someone might turn it into a chorus. And the children? Oh, they memorize these verses like pop hits. They chant them in alleyways, whisper them to sleeping goats, repeat them while splashing in the river. Some of them grow up dreaming of being griots themselves, not because of the history, but because it looks fun to roast a duke with perfect rhythm. The griot tradition has survived centuries, and even today, you'll find echoes of these sharp-tongued performers in modern West African music, storytelling, and public discourse. But in the 14th century, they were at their peak, honored, feared, and occasionally bribed to please not sing that one song again. You sit beneath the tree trying to be inconspicuous, but a griot glances your way, twitches one eyebrow, and starts strumming his instrument again. You get the distinct feeling your afternoon just became material. The scent of charcoal and ripe dates floats through the thick, buzzing air of Timbuktu's bustling market square. You wander through aisles of pottery, bolts of indigo cloth, salted fish, stacked like shingles, and gossip. Always gossip. It's traded here just as eagerly as pepper and gold dust. You don't even need to speak, just stand still for a few minutes, and a stranger will eventually lean in and say something like, "They say the salt merchant's daughter ran off with the drummer from Gao," as though you were obviously waiting to hear it. Markets in the Mali Empire were the ultimate rumor incubators. With traders and townsfolk packed into close quarters, there was no such thing as a private moment. Every transaction was a potential story, and these weren't just petty whispers, they were part of the social fabric. What was said here today could echo all the way to the palace by tomorrow, possibly reaching the ears of someone very important, sitting on a very large cushion, deciding whether your taxes should go up. The gossip economy wasn't just active, it was competitive. You had to have the newest news. The best twist, preferably something about a noblewoman and a cursed necklace, or a djinn that appeared in someone's flower bag. Bonus points if the tale was overheard rather than told directly. Second-hand knowledge always tasted spicier. Historians still debate whether this intensity was due to the oral nature of the culture. No printing presses, after all. Or if it stemmed from a deeper sense of community investment. Everyone felt involved. Everyone had a stake in the lives of everyone else. And the more outrageous the story, the more it helped solidify a shared sense of knowing. This created an unspoken hierarchy of information value. Fresh gossip trumped old news. First-hand drama topped third-hand hearsay. If your friend heard something from her cousin's neighbor's uncle, that was mildly interesting. But if she saw it with her own eyes, say the local scribe slipping into the weaver's hut with suspicious speed, That was premium content. You pass a row of women braiding hair beneath a canopy of reed mats. Their hands move swiftly, precisely, but their mouths, even faster. One laughs, another leans in with eyes wide. You catch a single phrase. And then, the goat ran into the mosque. You don't know what came before or after, but judging by the cackling, it's already a classic. Even the vendors were active participants in this swirl of storytelling. Some offered discounts if you brought particularly good gossip. Others used tales to sweeten sales pitches. This cloth is from Jenne, where a noble once hid in a fabric cart to escape a marriage. Whether true or not hardly mattered. The story felt true, which in the market was better than proof. And heaven forbid you try to shop silently. That just made people suspicious. Keeping to yourself in the Mali marketplace was a bit like walking into a birthday party and refusing cake. It made people wonder what you had to hide. Some stalls were legendary for being gossip hubs, not because they sold anything particularly great, but because the stall owner had the best ears. One old man who sold spiced honey was said to know more secrets than the court scribes. People would line up pretending to sample his wares just to catch a few drops of rumor. Of course, not all gossip was light-hearted. Some had consequences. A whispered accusation in the wrong ear could spark a feud, or worse, a court summons. There were even known instances of trade routes being rerouted because a merchant's reputation took a hit in the market stalls of Timbuktu. One fellow was apparently banned from entering 3 towns after a particularly unflattering tale about a donkey, a wine jug, and an unplanned bath. And yet, this bustling mess of fact and fiction served a real function. It acted as both surveillance and social glue. Kings could learn who was unhappy without sending formal investigators. Elders could guide younger generations through parables of recent scandals. Communities could calibrate their shared values by laughing, gasping, or judging together. You brush past a spice seller and he winks. Did you hear about the Songhai ambassador's sandals? No. Good, then let me tell you. And just like that, you're in it again. Every word you hear may contain a kernel of truth, or none at all. But it doesn't matter. What matters is the telling, the ritual of it. The delicious tension of maybe knowing something no one else does. You realize now, as the air grows warmer and the noise settles into a kind of rhythmic hum, that this marketplace isn't just for goods, it's a theater. A confessional, a gossip forge, churning out fresh news like loaves of sweet millet bread. And somewhere, someone is already repeating the thing you just said. You think you're just walking through the palace kitchens to sneak a second look at those roasted yams, but don't let the clatter of clay pots fool you. This is no culinary safe zone. The kitchen staff, the servants, the water carriers humming to themselves, they're the most dangerous informants in the empire. Not dangerous in a dagger under the tunic way. Dangerous in the they know everything and forget nothing kind of way. And if you think your offhand comment about the vizier's suspiciously large turban was made in confidence while chewing cassava by the doorframe, sorry. The girl scrubbing gourds heard it. And her aunt lives next door to the royal astrologer. And her cousin once gave the king's cousin a foot massage. So really, it's already halfway to Musa. The people closest to the everyday rhythms of royal life were also the best positioned to collect and distribute information. Servants, attendants, porters, these weren't invisible hands. These were walking encyclopedias of human drama. They passed messages without parchment. They carried secrets tucked into tray corners, under jug handles, between washed linens and bowls of stew. Historians still argue whether this flow of servant gossip was orchestrated by the royal court, or whether it simply flourished organically under the weight of sheer human curiosity. Either way, it created a second court beneath the visible one, a whispering world that pulsed through corridors and courtyards, interpreting, translating, and quietly influencing everything. And the gossip wasn't just about nobles. Oh no. A cook might track who eats too much when anxious. A bath attendant might note who avoids eye contact on days of judgment. A laundry maid might recognize a stain for what it really is, whether mango pulp or fear sweat. In an empire where performance was everything, behind-the-scenes staff were the only ones who ever saw the rehearsal. There's a quiet hierarchy, too. The longer you've been in service, the more you know. A veteran steward with a sharp ear could outmaneuver a junior diplomat in a court discussion just by dropping a perfectly timed phrase like, "Of course, Lord Sadio was absent from the naming ceremony. Again." Cue polite laughter and deeply clenched teeth. You pass a line of servants carrying clay jugs and bowls toward the outer pavilions. One of them turns slightly and murmurs, "They say the librarian's niece has been reading the love poems too closely." Just like that. Casual, dry. But enough to raise eyebrows at court for a month. You nod, unsure how to respond. The servant nods back as if to say, "That's right." You're in the system now. There's something strangely comforting in the way this invisible network functions. It's not malicious. Not exactly. It's curious. It's participatory. Everyone has a role. Everyone listens. Everyone tells. The system self-adjusts. If a rumor gets too wild, someone with a little more status quietly corrects it. If it proves entertaining, someone with less status quietly expands it. Even meals become performance art. Where you sit, what you eat, how many bites, who serves you, who watches, who laughs too loud when you spill your sauce. It's all data. It's all part of the ever-growing storybook that is life under Mansa Musa. There's one infamous tale about a kitchen boy who overheard a noblewoman muttering something about borrowing a jeweled anklet. He told a friend, who told a trader, who told a griot. The griot turned it into a poem. The poem was performed. The noblewoman heard it and laughed. But 2 weeks later, she gave the anklet back. There's power here, not brute power. Not ink and wax seal power, but quiet, fermented influence, the kind that sits low and slow and eventually moves mountains. And it's not all high drama. Some of it is just petty perfection. One servant swears she saw a royal advisor picking his nose during prayers. Another claims the palace cat has a secret second home in the armory. A third insists Lady Teneba's new hairstyle is actually a repurposed basket, none of it world-shattering. All of it glorious. By the time you reach the end of the corridor and smell the palm oil bubbling in an iron pot, you've already been told 3 new things, none of which you asked for. You try to remember who said what, but it's too late. It's all blending together now, forming a sticky web of shared truth and shared delusion. You smile. Because here, in the empire of gossip, you don't just have a reputation, you share custody of it with 100 other people. And that kitchen boy stirring millet? He probably knows how this section of your story ends before you do. You make your way through the midday haze toward the stables, the dry earth crackling underfoot, when something peculiar catches your attention. A group of traders is arguing, not loudly, but with the kind of tightly coiled intensity that suggests they're not fighting over camels or copper pots. One of them glances around, leans in, and whispers something that makes the others burst into barely suppressed laughter. Whatever was said, it has weight, because in 14th century Mali, even camels carry gossip. This is not poetic exaggeration. The trade caravans that crisscrossed the empire weren't just vessels of salt, gold, and books. They were pulsing arteries of information, carrying tales from village to village, court to court, oases to empires. Gossip rode as naturally on those caravans as leather goods or cola nuts, and the humans walking beside the camels, drivers, porters, bodyguards, were trained not only in survival, but in storytelling. The empire's trade routes stretched vast and wide, some running all the way to Morocco, others threading south toward the rainforests or east to the Songhai kingdom. Along these sandy veins, rumors could stretch like shadows at dusk, growing longer, weirder, and more embellished with every mile. By the time a tale made it from Nyani to Timbuktu, it might involve 3 jinn, a misquoted prayer, and a chicken that could sing in 2 dialects. Historians still argue whether this constant flow of traveling tales was an informal intelligence network or simply an unavoidable consequence of human nature. After all, if you're walking for 30 days across a desert, you're going to talk about something. And let's be honest, you're not going to discuss tax ledgers. Instead, you're going to tell your fellow trader about the merchant in Walata, who accidentally married his cousin's second wife, or the Songhai prince, who tried to tame a wild ostrich using only flattery. Maybe you'll add a little flair to keep your companions awake. Maybe you'll leave out a detail to make yourself look smarter. But always, you'll share what you've heard. It wasn't just idle chatter. Caravan gossip was valuable. Knowing that a certain noble was under royal scrutiny could save your cargo. Learning that a minor road was closed not because of flooding, but because someone claimed to see glowing eyes in the brush. Well, you might take the long way around. Even kings depended on these informal reports. What came in with the caravans often mattered more than what was sent out by royal decree. And the best part? Camels are incredibly nonchalant witnesses. You could whisper the entire downfall of a merchant dynasty to your fellow trader, and the camel would just blink slowly and chew, as if to say, "That's old news, friend." There's a famous story about a trader named Barima, who was supposedly so good at collecting and sharing information that people started sending him gifts before he arrived, just to encourage a few favorable tales. It's said that when he finally visited Timbuktu, a local scribe gave him a formal welcome letter titled, "To the man whose mouth is mightier than his ledger." You pass a caravan just now leaving for Walata. The lead camel has beads woven into its harness, and the driver, barefoot, skin tanned like leather, gives you a knowing smile. He's heard something. You know it. You know he knows you know it, but he's not telling. Not yet. There's etiquette to this kind of thing. A good rumor can't be spilled too quickly. It has to simmer. And caravan gossip? That's aged like date wine. It gets richer, darker, more potent with time. By the time it reaches the palace, it might be laced with enough poetry and nonsense that no one remembers the original event. But everyone agrees it must have been fascinating. Even the way traders delivered gossip had style. Some would drop hints mid-transaction. "This salt is from Tagaza, where I hear the mayor's son has taken up dramatic hobbies." Others might gift a loaf of bread and say, "Eat this while you think about the Songhai envoy's new spiritual advisor." The message was clear. We bring more than goods. We bring stories. You think again about that trader with the sly smile. Maybe he's not laughing at your dusty tunic. Maybe he's already imagined a whole story about you. Something involving a scandal, a camel, and a suspiciously empty saddlebag. And by the time you return to the market, your tale will be halfway to the next village, trailing behind a beast of burden with a bad attitude and excellent hearing. In this empire, the wind carries whispers. The roads are paved with implications, and if you ever think your secrets are safe just because you're in the middle of nowhere, remember that the camel is listening, and the camel never forgets. You've barely made it halfway through your morning millet cake when the music starts again, slow and wandering, the kind of tune that seems casual until you notice everyone around you is listening a little too hard. A woman selling pottery pauses mid-sale. A boy drops a basket of cola nuts. Even the chickens look vaguely attentive. That's when you realize someone's secrets are about to be sung. Because in 14th century Mali, music doesn't just entertain, it broadcasts. It informs, and sometimes it exposes. This particular tune is being plucked on a kora, the strings vibrating with just enough sass to suggest satire is on the way. You don't know the lyrics yet, but you recognize the rhythm. It's the rhythm of polite mockery, the melody of someone's business becoming public business. And tonight's target might be you, might be the governor's cousin. Might be both. This is what happens when music becomes memory's favorite weapon. Everyone expects the griots to tell the grand stories, the founding of empires, the valor of kings, the long, noble genealogies. But they also expect a little mischief. A little, and then he fell into the fountain while trying to impress a merchant's wife, sprinkled in for flavor. What makes it even more dangerous is that music travels faster than the facts it's based on. By the time the song's made it around the courtyard twice, it's already mutated into a version where a goat was involved. There were at least 3 jilted lovers, and someone definitely lost their pants. Historians still argue whether these musical rumors were used intentionally to shape public opinion or if they just sort of got out of hand. Either way, their impact was real. A well-placed lyric could do more damage than an official edict. A chorus repeated by children in the alleyways could ruin a reputation quicker than any royal decree. And the court adored it. Mansa Musa himself was known to chuckle deeply at clever verses, occasionally rewarding the performer with bolts of cloth or a scoop of gold dust. You know, a standard tip for publicly humiliating someone through song. The melodies were subtle, but the messages sharp. Think of it as singing telegram meets roast battle meets political theater. Someone once said, if you want to live a quiet life in Mali, don't dance. Don't speak. And whatever you do, don't make a griot's eyebrows twitch. You overhear the chorus now. The merchant of rice with fingers so light, who swore on his donkey, I've paid full price. But the baskets grew thin, and the scales did not lie. And now he sells silence, while whispering why. That's not just a jingle. That's someone's whole career crumbling to the beat of a gourd drum. And tomorrow, every apprentice boy, every fruit seller, and every royal guard on break will be humming it under their breath. What's worse, or perhaps more delightful, is that no one is safe, not even the griots themselves. There's a strange kind of circular justice here. If a griot gets too bold or too obvious, someone else will compose another song in response, like musical gossip ping-pong, a lyrical clapback. Suddenly, the griot who mocked your limp is being serenaded with verses about how he once fell asleep in a goat pen after too much date wine. And if you're thinking you can just keep quiet, lay low, avoid the lyrical spotlight, think again. Sometimes silence itself becomes suspicious. A man who speaks no ill and laughs at no jokes, clearly hiding something, possibly 2 somethings, maybe a third. It's all part of the game. To live in Mali during the golden age of gossip was to accept that your story, your stumbles, your triumphs, and your weird hat collection were all fair game for musical adaptation. If you were lucky, it would be flattering. If not, well, at least the chorus was catchy. You walk past a courtyard and hear a group of teenagers singing that same rice merchant tune, but with added dance moves now. They've choreographed the moment where he sells silence. There's even a pantomimed rice scale. The damage is done. And yet there's something oddly comforting in all of this. To be the subject of a verse is, in some strange way, to be part of the community, to matter, even if it's just because you once tried to flirt with someone using a poorly rhymed proverb. In a world without newspapers, this was the front page. These songs were the social record. You just hoped your entry didn't include the phrase mango incident. You're following the sound of a drum beat that's a little too jaunty for this early in the day, when you stumble into a small gathering near the riverbank. There's a group of villagers seated in a rough circle, clapping gently as a young man strums a lute-like instrument and belts out a tale. It takes only a few words to realize this isn't a praise song or an epic. This is something much pettier. And then, the performer sings, he said the robe was imported, but we all saw the stitching, done by his aunt, behind the millet barn, just before the rain. The crowd wheezes with laughter. A few nod knowingly. One woman mutters, "He'll never wear that robe again." Welcome to the land where even family members might sing about your secrets. Because in the Mali Empire, public storytelling was not limited to professionals. You didn't need a royal title, an instrument, or a griot's blessing. If you had a voice, a memory, and a grudge, you were part of the system, especially if you were related. Mali was a world where extended families lived close, physically, emotionally, and sometimes uncomfortably. Privacy wasn't just scarce, it was practically taboo. You shared chores, food, tools, and if you weren't careful, your most embarrassing stories. Historians still debate whether these household roasts were intended as playful bonding or a form of social pressure to behave properly. Likely both, because when your cousin starts singing about the time you got scared by a lizard and fell into a water barrel, it's hilarious. The first 3 times. After that, it's an incentive to move to another village, or at least hide the drums, even more dangerous than your cousins. The children. Little kids with loose lips and impeccable memory. They would overhear your midnight argument or your ill-fated poem to the neighbor's daughter, and by morning, they'd be reciting it in perfect mimicry, with all the added hand gestures and sound effects. There's a legendary example of a royal page boy who once overheard 2 nobles arguing over a goat loan gone sour. The next day, he performed an exaggerated puppet version of the dispute, with dried gourds as props, and had the entire kitchen staff rolling in the aisles. One of the nobles laughed so hard, he forgave the debt. The other one moved to Janae. Even household servants got in on the action. A wet nurse might murmur a lullaby that subtly called out the merchant who forgets his debts but not his wine. A cook might hum a tune while stirring okra, each verse reminding the head housekeeper that everyone knows she's been sneaking honey cakes. And if you tried to defend yourself, deny the story, explain your side, it only made it worse. Defensiveness was seen as confirmation. In this world, better to laugh along, pretend you're in on the joke, and hope the next verse stars someone else. There's a gentle cruelty to it, but also a strange tenderness. These roasts were rarely cruel for cruelty's sake. They were reminders that nobody could rise too high, take themselves too seriously, or escape the tangled web of community memory. Even if you were respected, even if you were powerful, your mistakes could, and likely would, become local theater. You hear a new song start. This one's slower, with a soothing rhythm, and you expect a tale of love or harvest. But no, it's about someone who accidentally complimented the wrong baby, mistaking the neighbor's child for their own niece. A grave sin. One that deserves at least 2 verses and a mock solemn refrain. The cheeks were round, the eyes were wide. How could I have known the other side? The crowd laughs again. No one even bothers to ask if it's true. Maybe it is. Maybe it happened to someone else. Maybe it didn't happen at all. Doesn't matter. It's being sung, so now it's part of the story, and that's the magic and menace of gossip through song. Once something is musical, it becomes sticky. It lingers. It attaches itself to faces, to places, to memories. You might forget who told you, but the melody, that'll be with you for days. As the gathering starts to break up and people head off to their afternoon chores, you realize something odd. No one seems bitter. Even the woman who clearly inspired the lizard barrel verse is smiling as she dusts off her wrap. There's a grace in being part of the communal narrative, even if your part is a punchline. You walk on, the sun warming your shoulders, the sound of the gossip song fading into the rustle of river reeds. You hum it softly to yourself. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small but unmistakable thought begins to form. They're going to sing about me, aren't they? The court smells of sandalwood and citrus today, but beneath that sweet perfume is something far more pungent. Competition. You feel it in the quickened pace of the servants, the way nobles glance sideways during meetings, and especially in the quiet corners of the garden where the whispers are thickest. Because here, in the upper echelons of Mansa Musa's court, gossip is more than entertainment. It's a weapon. And gold? Oh, gold is just the bait. Welcome to the high-stakes art of bribed rumor. It starts innocently enough with a gift. A bolt of silk accidentally left at a neighbor's door. A generous handful of cola nuts slipped into a friend's pocket. But everyone knows what these gestures mean. Here, take this, and in return, maybe mention that someone hasn't been quite as loyal to the king as they pretend. You might expect such underhanded tactics from schemers or spies, but in 14th century Mali, even poets, healers, and cooks could get in on the action. After all, if you knew a secret and knew how to tell it just slightly wrong, or just provocatively enough, you could trade that information for all sorts of lovely things: fabric, food, favors, maybe even a camel. A particularly juicy piece of gossip could buy you comfort for months. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa encouraged this shadow economy or simply tolerated it as a side effect of courtly life. What is known is that he himself was no stranger to the politics of information. He famously kept a rotation of advisors, not because they gave better counsel, but because it made sure no one voice got too confident, too trusted, or too unobserved. And that included the gossip brokers. You walk past a row of scribes, their hands moving steadily across parchment. But they're not just copying trade contracts and genealogies. They're also listening, watching, reporting. For the right price, or the right threat, they might quietly mention that Lord Tandia is spending an awful lot of time at the astrologer's tower, or that Lady Kanku's son is starting to look very much like someone from Songhai. The king never acts on rumors alone, but he always hears them. That's the rule. The performance must be maintained. No accusations, no direct punishments, just subtle shifts. One week, you're seated near the dais. Next week, you're at the back of the courtyard, behind a particularly obstructive pillar. No explanation. Just silence. Everyone knows why. Gold doesn't just speak here. It hums. It sings. It gently suggests, perhaps we let that story slip at the evening meal. Casually, with a smile. And those who can't afford gold, they find other ways. Gossip trades hands like coin. I'll tell you what I heard about the trade tax if you tell me whether the Queen Mother really cancelled that ceremony last moon. Information is currency, and everyone's buying. Even artists get involved. One famed potter once shaped a clay jug that depicted a suspiciously specific scene: a fat nobleman dropping a bribe into a child's satchel. No names, of course. Just symbolism. But the resemblance was clear enough that the jug mysteriously cracked before it could be displayed at the palace bazaar. Still, people remember. And memory, as you've likely gathered by now, is the real power here. There's even etiquette around how to accept a bribe. Too eager, and you look desperate. Too slow, and you risk losing the scoop to someone quicker. Ideally, you pause just long enough to seem reluctant, sigh dramatically, then agree, but only because it's in the interest of the realm. You sit near the fountain now, pretending not to watch a servant girl hand a folded scrap of cloth to a messenger. The messenger bows and walks off without a word. Inside the cloth, maybe cinnamon, maybe coins. Maybe a carefully phrased rumor about which nobleman is no longer sleeping in his own house. And somewhere, maybe in the shade of the baobab tree or in the quiet echo of the mosque courtyard, that rumor will grow. It will be trimmed, painted, fluffed, and dressed for public consumption. And when it emerges, it will no longer be a rumor. It will be a story, a lesson, a warning. You realize then that in Mali, gossip isn't just a game or an indulgence. It's a mechanism, a means of control. It punishes arrogance, rewards cleverness, and keeps the mighty just humble enough to keep glancing over their shoulders. You finish your millet beer and rise. Somewhere behind you, two men chuckle. You catch just a fragment. And after all that, he still thought it was real ivory. You don't turn around. You don't need to. You're already part of the next transaction. You're trying to keep a low profile today. Tunic a little plainer, pace a little slower, voice barely above a whisper. It doesn't matter. The moment you step into the great open courtyard of the royal compound, someone's eyes are already on your shoes. Or rather, your lack of shoes, because here in the Empire of Mali, how you dress doesn't just say who you are, it says everything you'd rather keep private, and today your feet are writing a scandal in dust. Let's talk about fashion, not in the runway sense, but in the who's wearing what and why and what does it mean sense. Because clothing in Mansa Musa's Mali was as loaded as a camel on a pilgrimage. Every hemline, fabric choice, turban angle, and even eyebrow shape was read like a paragraph. And yes, people really did gossip about your eyebrows. In this empire, the people didn't just notice what you wore, they interpreted it. That new indigo robe. Ah, you're showing off, or hiding something, or trying to impress the Songhai ambassador's cousin. That slightly frayed sash? Financial trouble, maybe. Or a sign of mourning. Or you just couldn't find your laundry boy. Either way, somebody is going to mention it before sundown. Historians still argue whether these unspoken fashion codes were enforced by tradition or simply grew from the culture's deep appreciation for aesthetics and hierarchy. What's clear is that everyone learned the language of clothing early and fluently. Even a child could tell you whether a particular stripe meant you were second cousin to a merchant prince or just really into striped things, and don't even try to mix pattern traditions. Wearing Fulani-style embroidery with Mande sandals? You might as well shout, "I have no idea what I'm doing," from the top of the mosque. People will talk. Loudly, while pretending not to look directly at you. It gets more specific. Gold bangles on both wrists, married, confident, possibly blessed by the Queen Mother herself. Gold bangle on just one wrist. Definitely a flirt. A turban folded left over right, formal. Right over left, casual, no turban. You're either extremely humble or extremely careless. Both are worth discussing. You pass a noblewoman now. Her wrap a soft lavender that shifts in the light. She's walking slowly, deliberately, with a serene expression, but the whispers begin before she's even out of earshot. She wore lavender yesterday too. Maybe she's signaling something. Or maybe she just likes lavender. No one just likes lavender. And then they all nod knowingly, as if that settles it. The possibility that someone might choose clothes without sending a coded message? Nonsense. This is Mali. Your wardrobe is your diary. Of course, nobles weren't the only ones scrutinized. Even servants were fair game. A kitchen boy wearing a sash slightly too rich for his station. Someone's been receiving favors. A scribe with a new leather pouch. Clearly bribed, clearly plotting. A merchant in perfectly plain robes. A decoy. Probably the richest man in the courtyard. Fashion was also used as revenge. There's a famous tale about a courtier who once arrived at a feast wearing a turban in exactly the same style as the vizier, an act considered just shy of treason. No one said anything. But the next week, the vizier's servants began a subtle campaign of style escalation. Every day, he appeared in more elaborate fabrics. On the fourth day, his outfit included actual bells. The courtier, overwhelmed, switched to brown wool and was never heard from again. And let's not forget the eyebrow wars. There was a period, scholars still debate the exact years, when nobles used eyebrow grooming as a way to indicate political alliances. Arched brows meant loyalty to the Queen Mother. Straight brows favored the king's brother. Unkempt, you were either rebellious, tired, or a philosopher, all equally suspicious. You stop to tie your sandal. A man nearby frowns, glances down, then smiles faintly. You feel it immediately. Your sandal lace is uneven. Left tighter than right. In court terms, you may as well have shouted, "I support redistributing the salt tax." You straighten, wipe your hands, and pretend not to notice the two attendants whispering behind the colonnade. One gestures toward your feet. The other nods solemnly. There it is. Your morning faux pas has been noted, processed, and is likely halfway to becoming a verse in someone's gossip poem by now. And honestly, that's just how it goes. In this empire, people don't wear clothes, they wear statements. Sometimes those statements are bold, sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're accidental. But always, always someone is watching. So the next time you reach for that robe, just know, you're not choosing an outfit. You're writing a headline. You wake to the sound of hooves, just a few at first, clacking softly against the packed dirt road, but they multiply quickly. Hoofbeats, bells, the creak of leather saddles, and the distant call of a bird you've never heard before. Riders are coming. And with them, gossip on horseback. Because in 14th century Mali, there was no such thing as a quiet delivery. The messengers, those royal emissaries galloping across the empire's endless sun-scorched expanses, weren't just carrying scrolls. They were carrying news, and not just the official kind. They brought gossip. Reliable, speculative, and absolutely scandalous, all at once. You peek through a curtain and see them arrive, dusty, dramatic, and clearly enjoying the theatricality of it all. Royal couriers were a breed unto themselves. Dressed smartly in sashes bearing the king's seal, they strode into towns like minor celebrities. And honestly, they were. They might not be griots, but people gathered when they spoke. Not for the official message, usually something dry about grain quotas or salt routes, but for the afterward. That's when the good stuff came out. The offhand comments, the subtle smirks, the "I shouldn't say this, but" that everyone leaned in to hear. And by the next morning, their offhand whisper was the talk of every household within 2 miles. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa's messaging network was intentionally gossipy or if it just became that way because, well, humans. But either way, it worked. It was one of the most efficient information systems in the pre-modern world. Messages could travel over 1,000 miles in mere days, thanks to well-placed relay stations, fast horses, and yes, people who loved to talk. Each courier stop wasn't just a pause to water the horses, it was a place to refresh, reset, and chat, with local chiefs, with town criers, with the woman who ran the boiled yam stand and definitely knew about the governor's personal sleeping arrangements. The couriers picked up new information like clay picks up dust, and when they left, they spread it behind them in every direction. One rider might start in Niani with the instruction, "Tell the northern province the harvest rituals will change," but by the time he reached the edge of the Sahel, the message would come out like this. "The king says to change the rituals." Also, his brother's wife fainted after seeing a scorpion in her water jar. And did you know the librarian's niece can read Arabic upside down? That last part wasn't relevant. But it was memorable. Sometimes the unofficial gossip even got more traction than the royal order. There's a famous tale about a royal decree that was ignored entirely because everyone was too busy talking about how the messenger sneezed 7 times in one sentence. Which, admittedly, is impressive. The couriers themselves developed reputations. A man named Jara was known for his sly winks and perfect comedic timing. People claimed you could tell whether a political scandal was true by how many times he tugged his beard before repeating it. Another rider, Isa too, was revered for her dramatic pauses. She could make a minor trade negotiation sound like a forbidden love affair involving 3 merchants and a stolen camel. And it wasn't just what the messengers said, it was how they said it. A raised eyebrow, a too casual shrug, a sudden shift in tone. These little cues added flavor to the information, because a direct statement was boring. But a sentence that implied something, that would last for weeks. You walk past the stables and hear a few riders laughing, brushing dust off their robes. One of them says, "I told them the Salt Road reopened, but I also mentioned Lady Binta's new apprentice looks very much like her brother's third son." More laughter. More nods. Another drop of speculation added to the bubbling stew. And here's the twist. It didn't matter if the gossip was true. The mere possibility of truth made it powerful. People didn't act based on confirmed reports. They acted based on social pressure, suspicion, and the fear of being the last to know something. So when that messenger leaves town and rides off into the shimmering heat, he leaves behind more than hoofprints. He leaves behind questions, murmurs. The need to connect dots that may not exist. A boy chases after him, shouting, "Wait, did he say anything about the camel tax?" He didn't. But now people are wondering if they missed something. They probably didn't. But still, in this world, silence is never empty. It's just the space between two really good rumors. You decide to spend the morning by the mosque. An ordinary enough choice, you think. Maybe you're hoping for quiet. Maybe you're thinking, surely this is a place where gossip doesn't flourish. But then you sit near a clay wall beneath the shade of a sycamore, and someone behind you snorts. Not just any snort, the kind of snort that follows a joke you didn't hear, but are definitely part of now. Because in the Mali Empire, even laughter had layers. It wasn't just spontaneous, it was a social tool, a language, a code. It could include you, exclude you, uplift, or quietly humiliate you. And in a world where people measured status in silk, salt, and who knew what about whom, laughter could say more than words ever dared. You lean back a bit. A group of women nearby is giggling in quiet bursts. One catches your eye, then quickly looks away. That's never a good sign. It's important to understand how finely tuned Malian social cues were. This wasn't random chuckling. This was crafted behavior. If you laughed too loudly, attention-seeking. Too quietly, possibly judgmental at the wrong time. Suspicious. At just the right moment, especially if your glance was well aimed, it was an announcement. Historians still argue whether this complex system of nonverbal communication developed as a survival tactic in the highly hierarchical court culture, or whether it simply evolved naturally alongside centuries of communal living. Either way, you'd better be paying attention, because if someone laughs behind you and you don't laugh with them, you might be the punchline. And then there's the smirk, the younger cousin of the laugh. A smirk can carry a full sentence. I know something you don't. It can be aimed across a courtyard or passed in a reflection. There are even stories of rival courtiers having full conversations entirely in micro-expressions. Let's not forget the knowing nod. Sometimes it comes after a joke, sometimes after nothing at all. Just a slow, serene nod that says, "Yes. We are both aware of what happened behind the stables during last week's rainstorm. We shall not speak of it, but we shall both laugh when the griot sings of it." You once again become very aware of your posture. Did your left elbow brush the wall too assertively? Is that a power stance or an accidental insult? You're not sure. You straighten up. Someone coughs and chuckles. You are doomed. Even the act of not reacting can be a reaction. That's the worst part. Because if someone drops a sly comment and you don't flinch, they'll assume you already knew. And if you do flinch, they'll assume you're involved. The only safe move is to blink, slowly, and chew something, slowly. Chewing implies detachment, usually. You pass a few older men seated under a tree playing a quiet game with pebbles and sipping something sour. One of them leans toward the others and mutters, "He looked like he understood the sermon," until they mentioned patience. A pause, a beat, soft laughter. Then a chorus of low, noises. The Malian version of the group side-eye. These are seasoned players. They don't even need full sentences anymore. And of course, laughter was never just about individuals. It was about alliances. Group laughter could signal unity, agreement, a shared understanding. It could isolate a target or defend a friend. The Queen Mother's inner circle was famous for their synchronized laugh technique. They'd laugh in delicate waves, like music. The longer the waves, the more secure you're standing. If your joke only earned you a polite exhale, you had a week, maybe, before your seat was moved next to the goose cages. In Mali, laughter wasn't the opposite of seriousness. It was often how seriousness was delivered. If someone laughed too hard at your success, that wasn't approval. That was a warning. Yes, how impressive. Let's see how long that lasts. You stop at a stall selling dried dates and hear two women exchanging greetings. One says, "Your son sings beautifully." The other replies, "He learned from the neighbor's goat." They both erupt into laughter, but the real message has already landed. Everyone nearby now knows. Those two families aren't on speaking terms anymore. They are, technically, but they aren't. And you chuckle quietly, hoping it's the correct level of amusement. You're not mocking. You're not oblivious. You're just politely amused, safe, probably. Because in this empire, if you laugh at the wrong moment, you're suspicious. And if you never laugh at all, well, then everyone assumes you know something truly terrible. You've been in the palace long enough to know the rhythm now, the flow of servants, the pulse of gossip, the gentle hum of information passing like wind through reeds. But there's one place where the tone always changes, where laughter softens, voices lower, and backs straighten. That place is wherever the Queen Mother is. She isn't always visible. Sometimes she's just a shape behind a silk screen or a hand motioning from within a darkened chamber. But her presence, unmistakable, and her power, vast. Because while Mansa Musa may wear the crown, the Queen Mother wields something even more potent, influence through information. She's not simply a royal figurehead or ceremonial advisor. She's the matriarch of a continent-spanning whisper network. If gossip is the true currency of the court, then the Queen Mother is the mint. Even the air feels thicker in her wing of the palace. The servants walk more carefully. The guards bow a fraction deeper. Everyone knows she doesn't raise her voice. She lowers the room's volume to meet her silence. And make no mistake, she knows everything. Not because she listens in on conversations herself, though she very well might, but because people want to tell her things. Need to. She's the epicenter of the court's soft power. If you earn her approval, doors open. If you lose her favor, those same doors close. Quietly, firmly, forever. Historians still argue whether the Queen Mothers of Mali functioned as political strategists in their own right, or whether they simply embodied a cultural respect for elder women. Most now agree it was both. These women weren't just respected, they were feared. Not because they carried weapons, but because they remembered everything. She sits in the inner courtyard today, attended by 3 younger women who never speak unless spoken to. Her hands are busy with a basket of cotton thread, but her ears, sharp as spear tips. Someone approaches with a ceremonial offering, a bowl of candied dates, and the Queen Mother nods, eyes barely flicking upward. It's enough. The woman offering them breathes a sigh of relief and retreats. You don't dare get too close, not yet. Instead, you observe the quiet rituals of her circle. Tea poured at precisely the right temperature. Fans waved in subtle synchronized arcs. A young girl whispers something into the ear of the Queen Mother's closest attendant, who nods once and slips away, message in hand. What was said? Nobody knows. But you can be sure it'll affect something. She has a reputation for discretion, but everyone knows she keeps a private ledger, not written, of course, but stored in memory. Names, dates, betrayals, favors owed. And she doesn't need to scold or punish, she just needs to know. That knowledge alone makes people behave. And when she does speak, it's like thunder after a long, dry silence. There's a tale, perhaps true, perhaps merely court legend, of a young noble who once tried to seduce the Queen Mother's niece to gain favor. She said nothing for weeks. Then, during a feast, she raised a cup and said, "Some men believe flattery makes the tree drop its fruit, but those are the men who've never met a thorn bush." The room fell silent. The noble turned crimson. The niece married someone else. You pass a servant girl returning from the Queen Mother's chamber with a stack of folded linens. She nods politely. You nod back, only now realizing that even the way you nod might be noted. And that's the thing, nothing escapes her. She has informants across every layer of the palace. Gardeners, griots, water carriers. Even the falconers. She doesn't need to spy. People bring her their stories willingly, like offerings at a shrine. Sometimes for approval, sometimes for absolution. In return, she grants protection, quiet guidance, a shift in the seating arrangement that spares you a month of humiliation, a subtle word to the king that keeps your taxes lower than your neighbors. Nothing overt, everything soft. That's her power, and she never, ever forgets. As you leave her quarters, you notice something scribbled discreetly in charcoal on the wall near the garden entrance. It's already smudged, perhaps erased just enough. It says simply, "Speak softly near the Queen Mother or be sung about twice." You don't laugh, you don't smile. You nod respectfully, just once, and keep walking. Later that evening, as the sun softens and golden light spills through the latticework of the palace courtyard, you hear music again. But this isn't the slow rhythm of a lone kora or the sly teasing of a street griot. This is louder, punctuated by laughter, rhythmic clapping, and the unmistakable cadence of a roast in progress. You follow the noise and find yourself near the outer audience chamber, where a crowd is gathered in loose circles, lounging on cushions or perched casually on low walls. In the center, standing barefoot with a stringed instrument and a grin sharper than a goat's front tooth, is the court's official entertainer. Now, entertainer may sound harmless, but don't let the word fool you. This performer, this jester, this satirist, this walking social landmine, wields a power unlike any decree or dagger, because when he tells your story, it's no longer yours. It's everyone's. You arrive just in time to catch the end of a verse. "Oh, noble he was, with rings on each toe. He bent for the king, but bowed much too low. And when he arose, we all saw the proof, that fashion and modesty sometimes go aloof." The crowd erupts, slapping thighs and wiping tears. One unfortunate noble in the back tries very hard to smile like he's enjoying himself. He is not. This is the royal roast, and it's part sport, part performance, part social purification ritual. The entertainer's job? To use satire and storytelling to strip away pride, expose hypocrisy, and remind everyone, especially those seated closest to the king, that status doesn't make you untouchable. Historians still argue whether this tradition functioned primarily as entertainment or as a subtle form of court discipline. Either way, it worked. A sharp lyric from the royal entertainer could shame a noble more effectively than any public reprimand. And since these sessions were sanctioned, encouraged even by the king himself, there was no appeal. You couldn't demand a retraction. You could only laugh along, pray the next verse wasn't about your sandals, and maybe consider being less dramatic next time you held court. Tonight's crowd is especially lively. The entertainer shifts from subject to subject like a master chef, seasoning each joke just right. He makes fun of a scribe for forgetting which dynasty came first. He put the chicken before the rooster and now our family tree lays eggs. Teases a merchant for showing up in matching silk with his donkey and, most daringly, throws a barbed but playful jab at one of the king's advisors. He speaks of justice, of law, of reform, but borrows more goats than the market can store. And when they return, they're all fatter and fed. So perhaps he reforms them, or rents them instead. The laughter this time is more cautious. The advisor smiles with the strain of a man internally compiling a list of revenge strategies, but he applauds. You must applaud. Not doing so would be even worse. You find yourself wondering how the entertainer gets away with it. The answer is layered. For one, he's a professional. He walks the fine line between disrespect and truth-telling with the grace of a tightrope walker. But more importantly, he's useful. These roasts keep the court humble. They give the people a voice without raising a rebellion. They let everyone release tension through giggles. It's no secret that the king loves these performances. Mansa Musa, despite his grandeur, had a sharp wit and a deep appreciation for humor that revealed human folly. It's said that during his pilgrimage to Mecca, he once delayed a diplomatic meeting because he was too busy laughing at a griot's imitation of his camel handler. And the entertainer doesn't just aim up. He spreads the barbs generously. A servant might be roasted for snoring too loudly. A falconer for falling asleep mid-hunt. Even you might get a line. And then came the traveler, silent and wise, who blinked like a frog when he looked at the skies. He asked for a map, but it came with a sting, for it led him in circles right back to the king. A few people look your way. One laughs. You raise your eyebrows in mock humility. The entertainer catches your eye, grins, and strums his final note. The crowd begins to drift away, smiles lingering like wood smoke in the air. You stay for a moment longer, watching the performer pack up his instrument, chatting with a kitchen boy who hands him a honey cake in admiration. In a court where everyone listens, sometimes it's the loudest joke that tells the quietest truth. And if you're lucky, you're just funny enough to escape the next verse. You're headed toward the outer wall of the palace now, where the sun beats hard against the stone and fewer nobles linger. Too exposed, too dusty. But here's where it gets interesting. You see two guards talking, not about threats or politics, but staring intently at the ground near a doorway. You follow their gaze. Footprints, not just any footprints, mind you. Bare feet, slightly uneven. One turns out more than the other. They trail off toward the storage rooms and vanish behind a stack of palm mats. And right there, without a word spoken, the men exchange a look. Because in 14th century Mali, even your footprints could start a rumor. In a society built on memory, movement left a mark, and that mark was read. Carefully, repeatedly, often with more speculation than accuracy. If you wanted privacy, you'd need more than silence. You'd need invisibility. And no one has that. Not even you. You lean casually against the wall and watch. Within minutes, one of the guards is murmuring to a passing steward, who in turn raises an eyebrow, then veers off toward the Queen Mother's wing. You don't even know whose feet those were, but it's too late. They've become a subject, a question, a possibility. Historians still argue how much of this behavior was intentional. Was it a form of surveillance? An inherited pattern of social policing? Or just the natural result of too many observant people with too few secrets to themselves? Regardless of its origin, the court of Mali was a place where signs mattered. Dust on a robe, a missing sandal, a tunic fastened one loop too high. People paid attention to what wasn't said and what wasn't hidden well enough. In fact, there was a popular phrase among palace servants: if the sandals are missing, the story is walking. Everyone knew what it meant. Something had happened. Someone would find out, and that someone might already be whistling about it in the gardens. There's a famous tale of a nobleman who tried to sneak a visitor into the palace under the cover of night. He swore the meeting was secret. No one saw them enter. No one overheard a word. But the next morning, 2 damp footprints were found in the prayer room. Bare, delicate, and unmistakably not his. By noon, the griots were composing verses titled "The Wet-Souled Stranger." By sunset, the visitor had been reassigned to a distant province, and no one ever mentioned it officially. Even outside the palace, people noticed. Market stall owners often swept the ground not just for cleanliness, but to note who had come by and how quickly they walked. Slow steps meant leisure. Fast steps meant urgency. A stagger, possibly drunk. Possibly cursed. Either way, worth mentioning. You once overheard a group of children in the alley behind the granary discussing someone's gait step patterns like seasoned detectives. "He walks in circles," one said. "Maybe he's avoiding her," another chimed in. "Or maybe he's cursed by the storyteller for ignoring her song." They nodded solemnly. Consensus reached. No proof necessary. In this world, your body writes. Your footprints are footnotes to an unspoken story. Your posture, a preface. The way your arm brushes your sash when you think no one's watching. Chapter 2, with a dramatic twist. Even footwear became part of the narrative. Leather sandals implied confidence, imported taste, political security. Rope sandals, humble, practical, poor, or pretending to be. No sandals, either devoutly spiritual or hiding from someone. You glance down at your own feet now, suddenly hyper-aware. Did you tread in something strange earlier? Are your steps too long? Is your left heel making a noise your right one isn't? Someone walks past and glances down, just briefly, just enough. Oh no, they're calculating, and once the gossip mathematicians get involved, it's only a matter of time. You might as well carve your name into the nearest tree with the phrase, "Please interpret everything I do." So what do you do? How do you survive in a world where the dust tells tales? You walk deliberately. You pause where you want them to notice. You drag your heel just enough to imply weariness or subtle regret. You let your footsteps write fiction. Because if they're going to invent a story anyway, you might as well help make it a good one. You awaken the next morning to the sound of shouting, not angry shouting, but the rhythmic kind, like someone reciting lines too loudly on purpose. And indeed, as you step outside, you see a gathering near the palace's western gate. 2 groups, 2 spokesmen, and in the air between them, words sharp enough to raise eyebrows and soft enough to escape punishment. It's not a brawl. It's not even an argument exactly. It's a feud, the Malian version. And in Mali, feuds begin where facts end and whispers begin. It's not about land or gold or honor, not directly. It's about what was said. Or worse, what was almost said and then passed through 4 mouths and 2 verses until someone's second cousin vowed never to speak again unless there were witnesses. And just like that, 2 families don't speak for a generation. You sit on a low stone wall and observe. This particular feud seems to have started over a song, something a griot sang last week, about a hunter who cried when his arrow broke. The problem? The hunter's name was never mentioned, but the description of his oddly striped robe matched a very real and very sensitive nobleman. He responded by staging a counter-performance. His family hosted a feast, to which the griot was not invited, but a different performer sang a very specific line. And some who sing do so with borrowed breath. Forgetting their songs may invite sudden death. No threats were made, just observations. A little poetic tension, but suddenly everyone was involved. Historians still argue whether these feuds had real political consequences or were more like stylized rituals, ways to let off steam and recalibrate social standing. Some think they were necessary, a kind of moral theater to remind everyone that even words have weight. Whatever the origin, the pattern is always the same. Someone takes offense at a phrasing, someone else defends it. More people are pulled in, first family, then friends, then people who just enjoy choosing sides. Alliances shift. gifts are exchanged. Someone's grandmother shakes her head and mutters about how this is why we don't let griots drink palm wine on fasting days. You'd think the king would step in. But Mansa Musa, according to legend, only intervenes when the feud threatens trade routes. Until then, he lets the stories fly. If they are singing about each other, he once reportedly said, at least they're not stabbing each other. And so it goes. Feuds can last a week or a lifetime. Some evolve into riddles, others become dances, literally. One of the most infamous family disputes began over a prayer bowl and ended with an annual performance in which two groups interpret the same story completely differently, accompanied by drumming and dramatic cape twirls. You walk past the two groups now, each clustered under separate awnings. One woman is fanning herself too quickly to be calm. Another is grinding millet with more force than necessary. A small boy mutters a rhyme to his friend. He who borrows goats will soon wear shame unless his uncle forgets his name. The rhyme makes no sense, but everyone knows exactly what he means. At the center of it all, the griot stands expressionless. He's been blamed, of course. Griots often are, but he simply shrugs and says, "I sing what I see." If you find yourself in the verse, perhaps you stood too close. There's no arguing with that. You realize now how dangerous and delightful these disputes can be. They draw boundaries without swords. They establish reputations with rhythm, and they offer something precious in a world where power can feel slippery, a reason to be remembered. Of course, it's not always so playful. There are stories, always stories, of feuds that escalated. A cousin who refused a marriage alliance because of a song. A merchant who left Timbuktu entirely rather than eat in the same banquet hall as the man who said he looked like a startled goat. But most disputes fade eventually. Someone gets tired, someone gets married. Someone composes a verse so funny that both sides laugh until they forget why they were fighting. There's a saying whispered among the palace kitchens. Words light the fire, but laughter pours the water. And as you watch the two groups slowly disperse, still glaring, still muttering, but no longer shouting, you suspect the water is already being fetched. Later, someone will retell this morning's event. They'll change a few details. They'll add a wild gesture or a misquoted line. And soon, the feud will become just another tale. A story, a song. One more spark in Mali's vast bonfire of rumor, pride, and poetry. By now, you've learned to spot the signs, the sidelong glances, the collective hush that falls just before something scandalous is about to be mentioned. The way two people lean close, as if discussing rainfall, but somehow still manage to say something absolutely nuclear. But today's story isn't coming from a griot or a market vendor or a chatty palace servant. Today, the tale is being told by the stars. Not metaphorically, literally. Because in the Empire of Mali, the court astrologers weren't just stargazers. They were truth smugglers, reputation makers, and occasional accidental gossips. And when they read the night sky, people listened, especially when it had something to say about you. You wander into the astrologer's courtyard, where patterned tiles absorb the morning heat, and thin threads of incense spiral upward like question marks. Two astrologers in embroidered robes stand over a table scattered with sand, stones, and a few scratched tablets. They are whispering, not to each other, but to the heavens. And nearby, a small crowd has gathered, pretending to discuss trade tax rates. But their ears are turned toward the murmured readings, because the stars, inconveniently, do not respect your privacy. One of the astrologers straightens, clears his throat, and speaks. Mars rises early today, which foretells bold choices and loose tongues. The crowd inhales sharply. Loose tongues? That can only mean one thing. Historians still argue about how much political influence Malian astrologers had. Some suggest they merely provided ceremonial wisdom, while others insist they played key roles in advising royal appointments, legal decisions, and strategic marriages. What's clear is that no major move at court happened without first consulting the stars, which sounds respectable enough until you remember that interpreting the stars is part science, part guesswork, and part interpretive dance of personal bias. And so, you get pronouncements like, a storm approaches from the east, and with it, betrayal from someone born near water, or, the moon weeps in Leo, those who've taken more than their share should sleep with one eye open. Both incredibly vague, both immediately triggering waves of speculation. Who was born near water? Who took more than their share? You'd think people would ask the astrologers to clarify, but no. Ambiguity is half the appeal. You see, vague prophecies are custom-built for gossip. They're the perfect fuel. Everyone fills in their own blanks. And in a court like Mansa Musa's, those blanks are rich with suspicion, memory, and last week's overheard conversation in the linen courtyard. The astrologers, of course, never admit to starting rumors. They claim only to interpret what is already known by the sky. But come on. They know exactly what they're doing. Some were famous for their subtlety. A man named Kalonkan was known to deliver prophecies with such masterful ambiguity that no one could tell if they'd been praised or insulted. One time he declared, "The star of the laughing jackal rises." By sunset, 5 nobles had written apologies to the Queen Mother, just in case. Others were more direct. An astrologer named Salia once pointed to the sky and said, "A man in blue will lose his house to fire before the next moon." That week, a courtier had his robe dyed green, moved his entire family to a different residence, and began exclusively using stone lamps. Nothing happened, but people remembered the prophecy and the panic it caused for years. You walk past a small group whispering under a canopy. One is insisting the recent comet means the end of a political alliance. Another says it proves the harvest will fail. A third leans in and says, no, everyone knows comets mean new pregnancies, and that is why Lady Diaka was crying during morning prayers. That last part, almost certainly invented. But the comet? It's real. Which means the rest of the story just needs enough logic to stick. The stars don't lie, they say, but they also don't speak clearly. And that is where Mali's court astrologers thrived. Not in prediction, but in suggestion. They offered the court plausible deniability with a celestial glow. You sit for a while, watching the astrologers at work. They never raise their voices. They never look directly at their audience. But every line they speak echoes. The palace walls seem to carry their words farther than they should. As you rise to leave, one of them glances your way and says softly, "Jupiter enters shadow this evening." Those who observe too much may find themselves part of the tale. You smile weakly. You're not sure if that was meant for you. But by tomorrow morning, someone will be sure of it. You duck into the shade of the palace's eastern gallery, a quiet colonnade where the air stays cooler and the stone floor soothes your feet. For a moment it feels peaceful. No gossip. No snickers. Just the soft scratch of reed pens and the occasional sigh from someone rethinking their entire sentence structure. You've found the scribes. At first glance, they seem like the least gossipy people in the empire. Heads down, backs straight. Eyes trained on parchment and palm leaf. But oh, how wrong you are. Because in 14th century Mali, the official chroniclers, the scribes tasked with preserving trade records, court decisions, and royal genealogies, had the power of the pen. And the thing about pens is, sometimes they wander. Officially, these men write only what's dictated, the precise words of the king, the calculated decisions of the council, the exact dates of harvests and wars and treaties. But tucked between the lines, in the margins, in the tiniest curls of ink, you'll find other things. They call them glosses, side notes, annotations, but let's not be coy. They're editorialized observations, which is to say, gossip. Historians still argue how intentional this was. Some claim these notes were just private musings, never meant to be read. Others believe they were encoded messages, passed between scribes as a secondary record of the truth. A few even suggest the scribes were satirists in disguise, quietly shaping the historical record with a flick of the quill and a knowing smirk. And you can see it for yourself. There's a scroll in the archives from the reign of Mansa Musa's father. It details a diplomatic dinner with a visiting chief. In the margin, a scribe has written in smaller, lighter ink, "The chief's third laugh was louder than protocol allows." Another line, "Noblewoman seated 2 cushions closer than expected." Observers noted almond scent. Not exactly international espionage. But you better believe those scribes were watching everything. You pass a group of them now, seated cross-legged with ink-stained fingers, gently blowing dust from fresh pages. One glances up and says, "Your name again?" You tell him. He nods, writes it down, then pauses. "Any titles, occupation, allegiances?" You shake your head. "Ah," he murmurs. "Then I'll just write." Observes more than he admits. He smiles. "You're being recorded." Probably in more than one sense. See, scribes didn't just record facts, they recorded tone, gesture, silence. They were trained not just to write, but to notice. One twitch of a noble's eyebrow, one awkward pause during a marriage negotiation, one feast guest who laughed too long at a joke not meant for him, all of it noted, filed away, and occasionally passed on in low-voiced conversations with trusted colleagues. There was one legendary scribe, Yahya the Careful, who reportedly filled an entire page with notes during a single tea ceremony. Nothing official was said, but he recorded 42 gestures, 3 ambiguous coughs, and a napkin that fell with symbolic weight. It said the king once asked, "Do we have records of the vizier's loyalty?" Yahya replied, "We do, your majesty, in footnotes. You continue your walk through the colonnade, and your eyes catch a glimpse of a recent document left open to dry." It's a simple announcement about tax adjustments, but just under the last line, lightly inscribed in the corner, no one mentioned Lady Satu's reaction. She smiled. Too early. You're not even sure what that means, but you suddenly feel the urge to smile, very carefully. That's the thing with scribes. Their words may not be spoken aloud. They may never sing them, or laugh at them, or slip them between bunches of bananas at the market. But their pens are stealthier than any tongue. And centuries later, when historians look back, what survives? Not the chuckles in the marketplace, not the sidelong glances in the hallway, but the ink, the paper. The quiet little phrases that someone once slipped between the lines with a practiced flick of the wrist and a memory sharp enough to slice plantain. So the next time you pass a scribe, don't bother whispering, don't bother hiding. Just be memorable, because if you're lucky, they'll write something flattering. If you're not, they'll still write it anyway. Today, you wander farther from the royal walls, past the polished courtyards and gold-dusted corridors, toward the edge of the outer city, where the bricks are uneven, the chickens wander freely, and the air is thick with smoke from breakfast fires. It's a different world here, humming with voices not laced in protocol or poetry, but in the delightful clatter of everyday gossip. And just because you're outside the palace doesn't mean you're beyond the empire of hearsay. In fact, you're now in its true capital. Because in the neighborhoods of Timbuktu, in the morning markets and smoky breakfast taverns, everyone is a gossip bard. No griot required. No formal training, just a keen eye, a sharper tongue, and a willingness to risk public correction if your story wasn't juicy enough. You pass a tea stand where three elders are locked in a very slow, very intense debate about whether the new imam's sandals are, in fact, last year's style. Nearby, a boy no older than 10 is breathlessly recounting a tale to a cluster of children. Something about a goat, an open window, and a sacred manuscript with jam on it. It makes no sense, and yet somehow it does. In these lower city quarters, storytelling isn't polished, it's performed raw. Gossip here is louder, faster, and far less filtered, but don't mistake it for mindless chatter. These people are trained by culture, trained to recall, embellish, infer, and debate with flair. Historians still argue whether this informal web of rumor played a stabilizing role in society, or simply served as noisy background static. But the people here would likely laugh at such academic pondering. "We talk because it's what humans do," one woman once said while peeling yams. And if you stop talking, someone might talk about why you stopped. There's a rhythm to it. A logic. Someone saw someone not attend morning prayer. Was it illness? Scandal? A secret marriage? Before long, 5 explanations bloom, each more detailed than the last. Someone else chimes in. "I heard he bought fish on a Monday." Who eats fish on a Monday? Gasps all around. The story grows legs. And sometimes, it's not even stories. It's intonation. One man leans over his plate and says, "She said it was a gift, but you know how she said it." Everyone at the table nods wide-eyed. They do know. Or at least, they pretend to. You take a seat at a low table in one of these breakfast taverns. The smell of fried millet cakes and warm baobab tea hangs in the air. People greet each other with cheerful insults. You hear 3 versions of the same story within 10 minutes. A merchant's cart broke on the road to Gao, version 1. The wheel cracked under a load of counterfeit ivory. Version 2? The merchant was too busy flirting to watch the pothole. Version 3. The cart broke because it was cursed by a rival who paid a griot to hum near it during a dust storm. You know what's funny? All 3 versions feel completely plausible. The beauty of gossip in this space is that no one needs certainty. It's the telling that counts. Accuracy is a bonus. Entertainment is the real prize. And yet, amid the laughter and exaggeration, important truths do emerge. These stories track which families are rising, which alliances are shifting, which marriages are brittle behind the smiles. The city breathes through these conversations. There's even a common saying down here: if the nobles carry gold, the people carry news. It's a trade as valuable as any spice or silk. And sometimes, far more useful. You sip your tea. Someone taps you on the shoulder. "Excuse me," she says. "Are you the one who nearly knocked over the Queen Mother's servant with a goat?" You blink. "What?" "No, that never happened." She raises her eyebrows. "Oh. That's strange, because I've already heard the story twice, and in one version, the goat was wearing a necklace." You start to protest, but she waves it off, smiling. "Don't worry. You should hear what they're saying about the palace cat." And just like that, you're in. Because here, the gossip doesn't need to be true. It just needs to feel like it could be. By now, you've heard so many stories that they start to blend together. Noble scandals, misplaced goats, eyebrow wars, mysterious footprints, prophetic comets. It's all starting to feel like one long, shimmering thread of whispered sentences and knowing glances. But here's the twist. The best stories, the ones that really stick, they're rarely told the same way twice, because in 14th century Mali, gossip isn't just about what happened. It's about how it's told, and to tell it well, you must master the sacred art of exaggeration. You see it happen in real time. You're resting under a shaded archway, watching a group of weavers chat while their looms clatter gently in the background. One begins recounting a familiar tale, the one about the merchant who tripped during the festival. You remember the original? He stumbled on a mango peel and dropped his platter of roasted peanuts. Humiliating, yes, but hardly epic. Except this time, the teller says the merchant was balancing 3 platters, tripped on a lizard, and landed in a ceremonial drum, which then rolled into the imam's ceremonial robe, which somehow ended with a chicken laying an egg in panic. It's absurd, it's delightful, and the group loves it. Historians still debate whether this embellishment culture served a broader social purpose or simply entertained people bored of accurate retellings. But exaggeration here isn't laziness, it's a skill. A flair for pacing, a respect for narrative drama. You don't just say someone spilled honey. You say the jar exploded like a prophecy. You don't just mention someone cried. You say their tears filled a bowl and drowned a beetle. And everyone plays along. No one interrupts with, "Actually, that's not what happened." That would be rude. Worse, boring. The game isn't to correct the story, it's to outdo it. Even children participate. A small boy nearby proudly announces that his uncle caught a fish this big, his arms stretched so wide he nearly topples over. A girl nods sagely and responds, "That's nothing. My aunt sneezed so loudly last week that all the pigeons in the mosque flew away, and the Queen Mother's scarf fell off. They've just met." They're now best friends. Even griots, the professional storytellers and historians of the realm, aren't immune to this tradition. Yes, they memorize lineages and record epic battles, but they also know the crowd expects a little spice. A little flair, maybe a slightly taller camel than originally existed, maybe a king's robe that shimmered like starlight soaked in gold dust, even if it was just moderately shiny. And the public, they reward this creativity. It's part of the cultural contract. You entertain us, we'll remember your version, we'll pass it on, we might even add to it ourselves. You pass a group of young men gathered around a bowl of groundnut stew, one of them deep into a tale about a royal advisor whose hat caught fire during an eclipse. You know that story. It wasn't an eclipse. It was a lantern, and the hat didn't burn. It singed. But now there's a verse. A chorus. Apparently the hat roared like the Lion of Niani and sent sparks toward the jealous stars. You don't even care that it's nonsense. You're just thrilled to hear what else gets added tomorrow. Of course, there's danger in all this. Occasionally, a tale snowballs too far. A joke told too cleverly becomes accepted as truth. A harmless exaggeration plants a seed of real suspicion. There are stories, deliciously ironic, of people losing friends, favors, or marriages over things that technically never happened, except in the version that felt right. Because that's the paradox of exaggeration. It reveals emotional truth, even when it bends the facts. When someone says a noble walked in like a mountain carried on silk, it may not be literal, but you understand something true about that person's arrogance. And in Mali, sometimes the feeling of a story matters more than the accuracy of its timeline. You reach the city square just as a griot begins another tale. You recognize the opening line, something about the lost caravan and the cursed camel. It's the third version you've heard this week. In one, the camel ran toward gold. In another, it vanished into the dunes. In today's telling, it apparently joined a group of dancers and never came back. The crowd laughs. Someone shouts, "That camel had better moves than my cousin." You smile, because you get it now. Here, stories aren't fixed. They're alive, growing, twisting, becoming what they need to be for each moment, each audience, each mood. Truth may start the tale, but exaggeration is what keeps it walking. The palace courtyard is unusually quiet today, not silent. This is Mali, after all, but hushed in that particular way that means someone did something very interesting, and no one knows whether they're allowed to talk about it yet. But don't worry. They will, because in this empire of whispers, there's one realm more treacherous than love triangles or sandal-based scandals, a realm where even the most seasoned gossip hound treads carefully. A realm of parchment, processions, and law. Yes, Tonight's tale drifts toward the rarely discussed but always overheard world of legal gossip. You wouldn't think legal records would be gossip fodder. They're about taxes, inheritance, boundaries, boring things, right? But oh no. In 14th century Mali, when a name appears on a court ledger, the real trial begins not in the courtroom, but in the streets, the tea stalls, and the palace kitchens. You settle near a group of courtiers in the shade, pretending to adjust your sandals. A young man with a smug grin fans himself with a palm leaf and says, "I hear Lord Farim's goat theft case has been delayed." The way he says delayed tells you everything. He means bribed, buried, or possibly bartered for a favor. The others smirk. This is the heart of legal gossip, not just what the case was, but how it was handled, why it was public, who interfered, and what it secretly meant. Historians still argue whether Mali's legal system encouraged this kind of social speculation, or whether it was just too intertwined with the palace to ever be purely procedural. One thing's certain, legal outcomes here carried layers of meaning. The official verdict, only the beginning. There's a saying here, the judge speaks with one tongue, the crowd hears with five. Even if a case ends in a fine or an apology, it's not the ruling that matters, it's the story people tell afterward. Take, for example, the infamous cheese tax dispute of Jenne. A local merchant challenged a noble over fermented goat cheese import rules. The judge ruled in favor of the merchant. But days later, the merchant's cousin was reassigned to a post somewhere so remote it was described only as near the sand where even camels pray for shade. The gossip? That the noble wasn't just bested, he was humiliated, and someone would pay for it quietly. Back in the palace, the Queen Mother's steward strolls by, whistling. That's how you know something real is happening. He only whistles when someone's reputation is actively being dismantled in real time. And sure enough, minutes later, a griot strolls through the courtyard humming a brand new tune. He swore on a scroll, but the scroll had a stain, and now his goats graze in the courtroom's domain. He offered sweet words and a gift on the side, but the ink ran away, and so did his pride. You have no idea who it's about. Yet, but you'll find out. Legal gossip in Mali often travels in layers. First, the official announcement, usually read aloud by a crier near the mosque. Next, the eyewitness retelling, which includes conveniently heightened emotion and the phrase, "You should have seen their face." Then, the interpretation. Was it fair? Was it politics? Was it revenge? And finally, the moral of the story, usually added by elders or clever servants who wrap every scandal in a proverb. There's also the unspoken rule. The more boring the case, the more outrageous the gossip it inspires. A boundary dispute between neighbors, guaranteed to become a tale of secret tunnels and star-crossed lovers by week's end. An inheritance challenge? Someone will claim the will was cursed by an ancestor ghost, probably twice removed, and if someone wins a case too confidently, oh, they're doomed. No one trusts an easy victory. In fact, public opinion often swings against the winner, because in a culture of balance and storytelling, the winner must still suffer something, even if it's just an unflattering song about their laugh. You catch a few more bits of the new scandal as you wander. Apparently, a royal advisor requested a hearing over an insult to his falcon. The insult, some say, was a poem. Others claim it was the way someone looked at the falcon. Still others insist the falcon wrote the poem himself, which makes absolutely no sense and is therefore the most popular version. And the best part, the case is still pending, which means the gossip is just getting started. You head back toward the center of the compound as the sun begins to fall in long golden slants. Somewhere behind you, someone says, "Justice is blind, but her left ear hears everything." You don't turn around. You just keep walking. Because around here, innocence isn't about what you did. It's about whether the story sticks. The sun's beginning to set now, casting a soft orange over the walls of Timbuktu. And just as you think the gossip mill might finally grind to a halt, a fresh voice drifts over the breeze, calm, foreign, and just a little too polite. Diplomats. Because tonight, we turn our attention to a particularly refined and gloriously backhanded flavor of gossip, cross-border rumor diplomacy. In Mali's golden age, the empire wasn't an isolated wonderland of camels and court songs. No, it was a major player on the international stage, and kings from Morocco, traders from Egypt, and envoys from Andalusia all passed through its gates. They came bearing spices, silk, scrolls, and the most delectable treasure of all, news from afar. Or, depending on who was telling it, gossip with a passport. You spot a group of foreign envoys seated on embroidered cushions under a pavilion. They're smiling, sipping mint tea, exchanging compliments. So far, so diplomatic. But listen closer. One says, "I hear your king is generous." In Egypt, they say he once handed a beggar so much gold that the man had to hire a camel just to carry it home. Everyone chuckles. The compliment is flattering, but it's also probing. A test, because if Mansa Musa is that generous with strangers, how does he treat his own nobles? Is he truly wise, or is he just throwing coin to avoid being questioned? That's how diplomatic gossip works. It's a game of carefully wrapped observations. Each phrase drips with courtesy, while quietly reaching for the pulse of a kingdom's power dynamics. Historians still argue how much these visiting emissaries influence the internal politics of Mali, or whether their rumors merely spiced the court's imagination. But there's no question that cross-border gossip carried weight. What a Moroccan trader said about Musa's pilgrimage in Cairo might affect how a local noble interpreted a tax edict. What an envoy whispered about the Sultan's war plans might influence a royal marriage proposal. It was international relations meets improv theater. You sit down near a fire pit where several local elders are listening to a traveler from Gao recount a tale involving a Songhai prince, 3 jealous poets, and an accidentally poisoned leg of roast antelope. No one knows if it's true, but no one doubts it's useful, because foreign gossip didn't just entertain, it helped people make decisions. Should I lend this merchant credit? Should I support this marriage? Should I trust the new ambassador's smile? People here knew how to listen with more than their ears. There's a particular envoy from Marrakesh, lean and elegant, who's become known for saying, "In my homeland, we have no such thing, but we have something very similar." Whatever follows that phrase is usually a carefully disguised accusation. Last week, he said, "In Marrakesh, a servant who disappears for 2 days during the census is usually stealing chickens." Everyone nodded sagely, then immediately turned to look at a local steward who just returned from exactly 2 days of unexplained leave. You see, these visitors know that here in Mali, what you imply often matters more than what you say, which is perfect for their purposes. They sow curiosity, stir the pot, and then step back, smiling, sipping tea, denying everything. And the Malians, they play along beautifully. This isn't their first rodeo. There are griots who can spot a diplomatic manipulation by syllable 3. There are traders who pass false rumors just to see who repeats them. There's a queen mother who once responded to a foreign envoy's pointed remark by reciting a proverb so ambiguous it took 2 weeks for scholars to agree she'd insulted his entire family line. This soft battlefield of words is a thing of beauty. You don't need swords when you have metaphors. You don't need armies when you can imply, suggest, raise eyebrows, and let the rest take care of itself. You walk past a scribe's bench where a letter is being penned, an official message to a court in Tunis, but in the margin, a secondary note has been added. Do not mention the new Songhai groom's accent. They're sensitive about it. You smile. Somewhere in this letter, there's probably a veiled hint about the Songhai court's current instability. wrapped in pleasantries, sealed with wax, and shipped off like a gift. Because when it comes to international gossip, no one ever gossips directly. They just say, "I heard," and let your imagination do the rest. The call to evening prayer has faded into the breeze, the last glints of sunlight slipping behind the city's rounded rooftops. Shadows lengthen, torches flicker to life, and the palace settles into its nighttime hush. But even as the day winds down, a different sort of murmur begins to rise. Not from the servants, not from the traders, but from the scholars. Yes, now we descend into the scholarly corners of Timbuktu, the libraries, the study halls, the candlelit chambers where religious jurists and poets debate morality, astronomy, and whether gossip is a sin or a sacred act of social maintenance. Because even in a world where everyone talks, someone's bound to ask, should we be doing this? You step into a cool, vaulted library space. The walls are lined with manuscripts, leather-bound, palm-leafed, or rolled tightly in reed casings. A group of scholars, robed in soft blues and sand-colored linens, sits cross-legged on mats, surrounded by ink pots and open texts. They're murmuring softly, heads nodding, fingers trailing across ancient verses. You catch a few words: Giba, intent, social preservation, divine accountability. They're debating gossip, and whether it is haram, harmless, or helpful. Historians still argue about this too. The Islamic scholarship of the time offered complex frameworks. The Quran forbade backbiting, ghiba, comparing it to eating the flesh of your dead brother. Harsh. But then again, scholars also recognize the need to discuss one another for legal, ethical, even protective reasons. And so within these libraries, a new kind of gossip emerged. Less market square scandal, more theological footnote. Scholars might say, "I only mention Lord Samake's lateness so we may pray for his better discipline." Or, "I heard of the merchant's dishonest weights, not to shame him, but to protect the integrity of our trade community." It wasn't just what you said, it was the intent behind it, why you said it. But here's the slippery slope. Once intent becomes part of the equation, the door cracks wide open for justifying every whisper. You overhear one scholar saying, "If you tell a truth that harms a man's reputation, is it not worse than a lie?" Another responds, "Unless that truth prevents greater harm, in which case silence is the sin." And so it spirals. A philosophical knot no one can quite untangle, but that everyone enjoys tugging at. One younger scholar offers a hypothetical. What if a griot sings a verse about a man's laziness, and that verse inspires him to work harder? Is the song sinful or sacred? An elder raises an eyebrow and replies, "Only if the man laughs when he hears it." Laughter, apparently, is the loophole. Outside the formal halls, these debates trickle into street theology. A fishmonger mutters that it's not gossip if the person already knows they can't dance. A baker argues that warning a friend about a flirtatious neighbor is a moral duty. An apprentice says nothing, but loudly drops a proverb. What the tongue reveals, the heart already knew. Everyone nods like that cleared things up. It didn't. Meanwhile, in the scholar's corner, you notice a curious stack of parchment. It contains names, not official court logs, not legal records, just observations. Seen in market with foreign fabrics. Missed prayer again. Discusses salt prices loudly. One of the scholars insists it's a record of social trends. Another admits it started as a private diary, but became useful for community character analysis. So yes, it's gossip. Catalogued, indexed, justified with scripture. But it's gentle gossip, framed as ethics, trimmed with citations, cloaked in incense. There's an old tale here about a scholar who tried to swear off all gossip entirely. He stopped speaking of others. Stopped repeating stories. Refused to react when things were said. After a week, his neighbors held an intervention. not out of concern for his piety, but because they were convinced he'd either gone mad or was plotting something huge. Because silence in a world so rich with narrative is the loudest statement of all. As you rise to leave the library, one of the scholars calls softly after you, "Friend, remember, what you say may echo, but what you withhold can rumble like thunder." You nod solemnly. Then step outside and immediately whisper that line to the next person you see. You're not even 3 steps from the scholars' quarters before you hear 2 palace guards debating something in low, suspicious tones. Did he really say that? He said he didn't, but someone overheard the griot quoting him. Then it must be true. The griot wouldn't just make it up. A pause. Would he? And just like that, you're face first in one of Mali's juiciest ongoing pastimes, dueling narratives. Because if gossip is the heartbeat of the empire, then disputed stories are its thumping headaches. This is where things get messy. Not everyone agrees on what happened. Not everyone agrees on why it happened. And some people don't even agree that anything happened. But that doesn't stop anyone from arguing about it for weeks. You find yourself in a shaded corner of the palace gardens where several courtiers are clustered around a storyteller named Badara. He's animated, gesturing wildly, halfway through recounting a notorious incident involving Mansa Musa and a foreign ambassador. According to him, the king once gifted the ambassador a cloak so heavy with gold that it knocked the man over when he tried to bow. The crowd laughs. Then a voice from the back chimes in, "That's not how it went." The cloak wasn't gold, it was elephant hair thread, and it caught fire near the ceremonial lantern. Now that is a different version, and just like that, the debate is on. Historians still argue whether these conflicting narratives represent simple memory errors, political agendas, or just people's need to entertain themselves while they wait for their yams to roast. In truth, it's probably all 3. In Mali, truth is rarely singular. It's layered, flexible. A story is shaped not just by facts, but by who tells it, how it's received, and whether someone in the back row raises a sarcastic eyebrow. There's a saying here. One man sees the moon, another sees a bowl of milk, and both think they're right. Even within the griot community, debates flourish. One griot swears Lady Isatou fainted at the Queen Mother's naming ceremony due to emotion. Another insists it was heat stroke. A third says she never fainted at all. She was fainting for dramatic effect, and none of them are backing down. These narrative disputes aren't always petty. Sometimes they're downright tense. A misremembered quote can shift loyalties. A disputed sighting can disrupt a marriage arrangement. There's a legendary incident in which 2 entire towns spent years disagreeing over whether a visiting prince had danced or simply twitched rhythmically to avoid a bee. A stone carving was eventually commissioned. It did not resolve the matter. In fact, entire performances have been built around these fuzzy events. One traveling troupe stages competing versions of a camel theft. In one, the thief is noble but hungry. In another, he's a scoundrel with an eye patch. In the third version, the camel runs away on its own and becomes a celebrated spiritual leader. All versions get applause. You pass a pair of servants rehearsing such a scene. One says, "Remember, this version I trip over the chicken, not the jug." The other replies, "Right, and this time the chicken insults me. Got it." Some even say that Mansa Musa himself encouraged this multiplicity. He once declared, "Let them tell the story 3 ways. That way, the truth will sit somewhere in the middle, comfortable and hidden." It's not about deception. It's about possibility. The many angles from which a moment can be seen, felt, retold. Here, a story with no variations is considered suspect, unloved, unlived in. You hear another snippet now. 2 older men arguing over the famous crocodile incident. One insists the beast was real. The other claims it was carved from wood and used as a ceremonial decoy. They agree only on one point, that the story has gotten much better over time, and perhaps that's the whole point. In a world built on memory and myth, The truth isn't always the headline. It's the material, the clay, the seed. Something to shape, water, and argue over while the millet cooks and the moon rises. So when you hear a new story tomorrow, one that sounds strangely familiar but ends differently than the last time, don't panic. Don't correct it. Just smile, tilt your head, and say, I hadn't heard that version before. Because around here, that's how legends grow. The night deepens now, and a hush spreads across the palace grounds. Not silence exactly, but a softer murmur, the kind that wraps around doorways and curls beneath windows. Lanterns glow like fireflies in clay sconces, and somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat tumbles gently over the rooftops. It's the hour when voices get lower, and shadows stretch longer. It's the hour of the walls, because in Mali, even the architecture gossips. You don't expect it at first. You lean against a smooth mud brick wall to rest your feet, watching the moonlight shimmer over a bronze basin. Then you hear it, a name, a soft echo, a whisper not quite whispered. You turn, but no one is there. You weren't imagining it, because these walls, they remember things. No, not in some enchanted, magical way, though plenty of people here will tell you otherwise. It's in the way the walls carry sound, the way they catch fragments of conversations and pass them ever so slyly to the next corner, the next hallway, the next ear. Historians still argue whether the acoustic design of Mali's palaces and mosques was deliberate or coincidental. But the result is undeniable. You can whisper something in one chamber and hear a response in another. Certain courtyards amplify murmurs better than trumpets. Certain hallways echo secrets so clearly that you'd swear the bricks had mouths. One griot once joked that the palace walls were better trained than any parrot, and no one corrected him. You walk past a stretch of inner corridor wall, the one near the Queen Mother's quarters, where no one speaks above a breath. There's a saying here, talk loud by that wall, and you'll dream of sandals slapping your head. You've never tested it. No one does. But everyone's heard the story of a noble who spoke carelessly there, and woke up the next day with his bed mysteriously moved to the farthest guard tower. Then there are the carvings. Not elaborate ones, just subtle marks, shallow scratches in the clay, symbols etched with a careful hand. You run your fingers over one. It's shaped like a fish. Innocent enough. But according to a steward who once tried to catalogue them, that fish marks a spot where a famous courtship argument took place, one that inspired 3 divorce petitions and a hit song. Elsewhere, you'll find a carved leaf, supposedly the symbol used by palace workers to mark walls that heard too much. Places where conversations had to be rerouted. One servant reportedly refused to mop near a particular corner of the library, claiming it leaked secrets. When pressed, she said the wall repeated her mother's name. No one pressed again. You wander into a quiet stone garden where storytellers sometimes rehearse at night. The walls here don't echo, they swallow. And that's just as eerie. Sound goes in, nothing comes out. It's where people go to not be heard. Which of course makes it extremely suspicious. You find 2 boys playing there with pebbles and whispering names of nobles, each trying to guess whose name will bounce back. One whispers, Sadio. Silence. The other tries, Tamba. A tiny echo returns. They both gasp. Is it real? Is it superstition? Does it matter? In Mali, perception is half the game. There's even a legend about a room in the old palace, a chamber so acoustically perfect that it recorded every word ever spoken inside it. The griots call it the listening room. No door, no windows, just a room that hears and holds. Supposedly, if you press your ear to the northern wall at night, you'll hear echoes from a century ago. Of course, no one knows where the room actually is, or if it exists, but nearly every noble has stood alone in a quiet chamber and asked a question they didn't want answered, just to see if the walls would respond. And when the walls don't answer, well, that's even more terrifying. Because in this empire, where words matter more than coins and silence is always suspect, listening is never passive, even when it's done by stone. You sit now, pressed lightly against a wall in the garden courtyard, the night around you thick with the scent of jasmine and the smoke of smoldering herbs. Somewhere nearby, someone speaks your name softly, too softly to echo, but loud enough that the wall hears it, and now you do too. By now, your ears are trained for it. The faint shifts in tone, the careful pauses, the way a story floats into a room just half a second before its teller appears. You've heard gossip in the markets, in the palaces, between griots and guards, even whispered by walls. But there's one place you've yet to visit, the one chamber where rumors don't just live, they metabolize. Tonight you slip into the palace kitchen. It's not a grand space. There are no polished surfaces, no silent footmen, just fire pits, low wooden tables, steam rising from clay pots, and the sharp, happy chaos of a room built on heat, hunger, and absolute narrative authority. Because in 14th century Mali, the cooks don't just feed the court, they flavor its gossip. The kitchen is the heartbeat of social digestion. Whatever's happening upstairs has already passed through here, sautéed and simmered into an entirely new dish. You hover by a basket of cassava, pretending to be useful. A woman chopping onions doesn't look up when she says, "So, you heard about the noble who fainted in the audience chamber?" You nod cautiously. She smirks. "He didn't faint. He was pretending." "Trying to avoid marrying the poet's daughter. Too many teeth," he says. The woman next to her cackles. "That's not what I heard." "I heard he saw her poetry and couldn't take it. Too many metaphors about camels." Someone else chimes in from across the kitchen. "You're both wrong. He actually fainted because he hadn't eaten. Been fasting 3 days to impress the imam." And just like that, you're watching gossip cook. The story turns, thickens, bubbles. Each version is like a different spice, some hot, some sweet, some purely invented, because it makes everyone laugh so hard, they drop their spoons. Historians still argue whether the palace kitchens were conscious centers of influence or just coincidental gossip hubs. But even the driest academic agrees, nothing travels faster than a story whispered over boiling broth. You pass by a stew pot where one of the older cooks is muttering to the meat. "If this doesn't soften faster than the steward's pride, we're all doomed." She turns to you. "Did you know he cried when his horse ignored him last week?" She shakes her head. "Not the horse's fault. Too much perfume. Confused the poor thing." This is how information works here. A cook might know which guard cried after duty, which noble refused their yam cakes, who ate too much honey at the last banquet and got gently removed for excessive glistening. And if a dish comes out overly salted, "That's not a mistake," someone will whisper. "It's a statement." Because meals carry meaning. A slightly scorched flatbread delivered to a courtier who insulted a kitchen hand. Entirely intentional. A missing side dish at a royal banquet. It says more than 100 scrolls. And don't get them started on spice blends. Some combinations are traditional, others are personal. One mix, dried chili, cardamom, ground mustard seed, is whispered to be used only when someone's engaged in particularly dishonest trade. Just enough to make them sweat, a cook once said, without breaking the law. And the best part? The palace knows. The nobles know. Everyone knows the kitchen is watching, listening. Seasoning everything with judgment, which is why no one dares mistreat a kitchen worker. There's a quiet threat in every dish. We know your taste preferences and your secrets. One griot even composed a short verse. "A noble may lie, and a poet may boast, but the cook remembers what burned on your toast. Say what you will, your pride may be shaken, but never forget who salted your bacon." You bite into a honey fritter handed to you by a smiling kitchen boy. He leans in and says, "That's the same kind I gave to the vizier yesterday." He said it reminded him of his mother. A pause. I didn't tell him I used goat milk instead of cow. Let him believe. You nod. The layers here are thicker than the stew, and just when you think you've heard it all, someone saunters in with fresh news. The moon viewing ceremony has been moved up by an hour. Why? Someone asks. Oh, the newcomer says casually. Apparently the astrologer was overheard telling the Queen Mother she'd be lucky tonight if she started early. A hush, then laughter, because of course no one's really here for the moon. They're here for what it means. You leave the warmth of the palace kitchen behind, your ears still humming with the laughter and layered meanings of seasoned cooks. Outside, the air feels cooler now, drier. The clouds have cleared, and the moon above Timbuktu hangs wide and low, like a freshly polished shield tilted toward the earth. And here, in this silver-blue stillness, you approach the final arena of gossip, the place where words stretch their longest shadows and legends make their dens, the cemetery. You might think that in a city as talkative as this one, the dead would be given peace. You would be wrong. In 14th century Mali, death was not the end of one's social standing, it was simply a transition to a different kind of relevance. Here, being remembered was everything, and how you were spoken of after your burial could define your status more than any robe or title ever had. There's a saying whispered as you step between the low, domed graves. What they say after you die is what you truly were. A group of elderly women sits nearby, sorting dried herbs and speaking in a steady rhythm. Their conversation flows from the living to the dead and back again without hesitation. One gestures toward a nearby grave. That's Maba's spot. Still hasn't rested, probably because people keep arguing whether he actually built that bridge or just took credit from his cousin. Another responds, either way, the bridge collapsed, didn't it? They both cackle, and you begin to understand. This is retrospective gossip, a special branch of storytelling where the details are fuzzy, the sources are questionable, and absolutely no one is around to correct you. Historians still argue how much of Mali's history was shaped by oral traditions that rewrote reputations after death. Entire legacies were burnished or smeared by gossip carried through generations. One noblewoman, celebrated in songs for her diplomacy, was also quietly mocked for wearing too much amber perfume. Another court official, remembered as pious and charitable, is also said to have screamed when he saw a frog once. Both are true. Or not. That's not really the point. You notice someone has placed an offering at one grave, a carved wooden spoon and a folded bit of fabric. Not religious ritual, but a quiet nod. He always stole spoons, a girl whispers beside you. We didn't mind. They say he made a chair out of them. What a way to be remembered. The griots occasionally perform in cemeteries, not mournful elegies, but full-on recitations of a person's most colorful moments. One such griot, standing barefoot on the stones, once sang an entire song about a deceased midwife who allegedly predicted births based on how loudly people sneezed. The chorus? 3 sneezes, twins, 1 sneeze, a girl. No sneeze? Check the neighbor's world. The locals still argue whether she was ever right, but they still sing it. Of course, not all grave gossip is light-hearted. Some carry weight, suspicion. Warnings. A grave that's never swept. A name no longer spoken. These are quiet sentences of shame. Everyone knows what they mean, even if no one says them aloud. In a culture where oral history shapes law, tradition, and identity, forgetting someone is the worst kind of punishment. But most grave gossip? It's just Mali doing what Mali does best, keeping stories alive, making sure no one fades into silence. Turning death into a posthumous stage for well-worn tales and half-believed rumors, embroidered with each retelling. You sit near a grave marked with a faded sun pattern. A young boy nearby tells you, That's where the man who told the funniest lies is buried. My uncle said he once convinced the king that mangoes could grow from gold coins. You smile. Did they, you ask? The boy shrugs. No, but we all wanted to believe it. And perhaps that's what it all comes down to. Gossip, truth, myth, memory, all dancing together across time. And as long as someone is telling your story, you're not really gone. You get up slowly, brushing the dust from your cloak. Somewhere nearby, a voice is already telling the story of someone else. A small group gathers. A new name is mentioned. A detail is added. Laughter follows. The dead are still very much with us. And the gossip. It never sleeps. The stars above have multiplied, now thick and humming in their quiet glitter across the desert sky. The night has long settled over Timbuktu, but the city doesn't sleep. It exhales. Slowly, gently, like a storyteller finishing a long tale, eyes twinkling, voice dropping low. You make your way back toward the heart of the city, past courtyards and colonnades now hushed in the after-hours quiet. And in this soft hour, one truth finally becomes clear. The real gossip, the deepest, most enduring gossip, isn't about thefts or scandals or fainting nobles. It's about you. Not you specifically, but what you represent. You, the newcomer. You, the observer. You, the listener who arrived with wide eyes and a borrowed cloak. Because in Mali, once you arrive, once you've been noticed, once someone so much as wonders aloud about your sandals, you are fair game. And fair game becomes legend fast. It starts small. A servant sees you talking to a guard. A market woman notes your preference for pomegranates. Someone overhears you humming a song they don't recognize. Where's that melody from? Probably Andalusia. No. Sounds like something they sing before camel races in Kanem. Are they even from Kanem? They look more like Futa Toro people. And suddenly you have a backstory. It snowballs. You're not just a traveler anymore. You're a former royal tutor fallen from grace, or a lost heir hiding in plain sight, or a spice merchant who once sold cumin to a caliph and now wanders searching for redemption. Historians still argue whether this narrative inflation was a byproduct of oral tradition or an intentional act of social mapping. Either way, you have become the subject of at least 3 distinct origin theories and one mildly offensive song involving scorpions and socks. You walk past a group of children drawing symbols in the dust. One turns and whispers to the others, "That's them. They know things." My aunt says they once dined with a king in silence, on purpose. Why in silence? The others ask. She doesn't know. That's why it's suspicious. And the best part? If you try to correct the story, if you explain that you're just a visitor passing through, they'll only nod politely and assume it's part of your cover, the griot. Oh, they're already composing. One older singer, seated near the mosque wall, is plucking at his lute. His voice floats toward the moonlit square. They came in dusk with quiet feet, their sandals plain, their purpose fleet. But no one walks through palace sand without a tale held in their hand. You recognize yourself in the verse, or do you? Because in this empire of gossip, no one owns their own narrative. Not entirely. Once you've entered the story machine, you are reshaped, polished. Recast. Your quietest moment may be retold tomorrow as a defining act of legend. Your sneeze might become the signal of a diplomatic plot. Your sigh might mean you once loved someone important, and maybe you did. You sit beneath a low acacia tree, listening to the soft wind tug at the leaves like turning pages. The city sleeps now, but the stories do not. Somewhere, someone is talking about what you said to that griot yesterday. Someone else is wondering how you got that scar on your wrist. Someone just mentioned your name, only they pronounced it a little differently. Slightly better. More poetic welcome to immortality. You lie back now, limbs heavy, your head resting on a woven mat still warm from the day's sun. Around you, Timbuktu has curled into its softest shape. No more drums. No more whispers. Even the wind has quieted to a kind of hush, the city wrapped in the slow exhale of a story told all the way to the end. But of course, it isn't the end. Because in this final stretch of the night, the last truth of gossip reveals itself, not in palaces or markets, not even in kitchens or graves. It lives in the folktales, the ones that slip free of dates and names, untethered from time, growing strange and star-shaped as they pass from mouth to mouth, season to season. You find yourself sitting beside an elder under the stars, wrapped in a robe so faded with age that it seems part of the sky. No one knows his name, not his real one. They just call him the Rememberer. He doesn't greet you. He just starts talking, and you listen. There once was a king, he begins, who feared silence more than death. So he demanded that someone always speak near him. When no one had anything new to say, they began repeating the old. One day, a servant made up a story about a lion that wore slippers. The king laughed, so they made up more, and soon they forgot which stories were true. The elder pauses, then shrugs. That was 3 kings ago, or maybe 7. No one knows if the lion ever existed. But the slippers? Someone claimed to have seen them. They were made of red silk and left paw prints that smelled like myrrh. You want to ask if this is history or fantasy, but in this hour, the line between them is smudged soft as charcoal. Historians still argue whether Mali's oldest legends are embroidered versions of real events or entirely invented to teach moral lessons. But in the palace of stories, that argument feels tired, because what is a story if not something someone cared enough to keep alive? You hear another tale about a boy who could hear lies in people's shoes and a woman who made a fortune selling dreams in clay jars. There's the one about the invisible bird that knew all the village secrets, and the one about the talking goat that corrected a griot's verse mid-performance. They're ridiculous, impossible, glorious, and you begin to understand. Gossip in Mali doesn't die. It mutates. It becomes fable, proverb, bedtime story. The grain of truth stretches, folds, blooms. A noble who tripped at court becomes a tale about a clumsy spirit who could only walk backward. A whispered rumor of forbidden love becomes a river that sings 2 names every time it floods. These stories aren't lies. They're what the truth grows up to be. You smile now, your eyes fluttering closed. You think back on the walls, the kitchens, the courts, the graves, the flicker of side eyes in moonlight. You've seen how gossip dances, petty, powerful, poetic, and you've seen what it becomes when no one is left to correct it, a legend. And so, if someone asks tomorrow whether you were truly there, whether you, the one who listened quietly and asked nothing, really walked the sand between the mosque and the river, they'll say, "Yes, I remember them. They once made the Queen Mother laugh," or "They caught the eye of a griot and didn't flinch." Or maybe even, they whispered something into the night, and the night whispered back. They may never agree on which story was yours. But your name? It will always be worth repeating. The stars have begun to dim now, just faint pricks of light against the soft indigo veil of early dawn. The roofs of Timbuktu are quiet silhouettes, and even the air feels like it's tiptoeing. You sit alone now, high on a ledge that overlooks the winding streets, watching as the sky decides whether it wants to be night or morning. You've made it to the final breath of the city's story, and in this hour, there are no more performances, no last-minute revelations. The gossip has stilled, at least for now. It's not silence exactly, it's something more forgiving. Like the city has decided to stop narrating your presence and simply let you be. So, you breathe in. Below, the first traders begin to stir, quiet figures arranging baskets, brushing dew from clay jars, whispering good morning, greetings laced with the final strands of dreams. No one mentions politics, or nobles, or who wore what at last night's moon ceremony. Not yet. This is the hour of still tongues and open hands, and as the light begins to return, so too do the memories. You think back through it all, the palace servants muttering coded truths, the griots spinning rhyme from rivalry, the kitchen cooks seasoning stories like stew, the very walls bending sound to their whim. And through it all, the feeling that every word spoken was a thread in something vast and shimmering and deeply human. You remember the graves, the way the dead were still very much in circulation. And the way you, just by existing here, had become part of the story machine. It's a strange comfort, isn't it? Knowing that even if you leave no scroll behind, no mural, no carved bust, someone will remember how you laughed when the griot changed your name. Someone will remember how you listened. And someone, probably a child not yet born, will misremember you entirely. And that version, it will be fantastic. Now, the sun finally lifts one golden finger over the edge of the world. A soft ray stretches across the sand, touches the domes, glides along the tops of acacia trees, and spills into the dusty streets. Timbuktu stirs. Someone somewhere yawns and mutters, "Did you hear what they said about the Queen Mother's cat?" And just like that, it begins again. And now, at last, you rest. The night has traveled its full arc, and the stories have curled into themselves like sleeping cats. The voices have quieted, the drums long silenced, the market gone still. Even the walls, those secret keepers, are content now to simply hold you up. Let the memory of the sand settle gently over your skin, warm in some places, cool in others. Let the fragrance of that last clay hearth, the honeyed fritter, the acacia leaves in the breeze, drift just beneath your nose. You can almost hear the soft brushing of palm fronds, the creak of an old wooden bench, the rhythm of feet walking slowly across packed earth. Steady, measured, familiar. Nothing is required of you now. There are no names left to learn, no rumors to chase. You've heard them all. You've wandered through the laughter, the layers, the glances, passed across flickering firelight. You've stood in the invisible room of echoes. You've whispered back, "You belong to the hush now." So close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breath slow, long, and easy. Let the rhythm of the night, of tales told, of lives half-remembered and beautifully misquoted, carry you. You are safe here, suspended between memory and dream, between the world that gossips and the one that forgets. No more questions, only rest, only this gentle desert wind and the faint final echo of someone, somewhere, saying your name with just the right amount of mystery. Sleep well, sweet dreams.